This podcast is brought to you by PC component retailer and boutique builder Silverknight PCs. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to get 6% off everything on their website. And it is also brought to you by healthy and delicious Vite Ramen. And it is also brought to you by CDKeyOffer.com that gets you great deals on Windows keys and other products. You can find links in the description and the proper offer codes for all of these sponsors, and we'll talk about them later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Sierra Glencore Tom, and today I am joined by my co-host.
Expanding increasingly more complex names to Intel CPU names, Dan.
Yeah, I was like, if he's lazy, he'll just say Meteor Lake, and if he's trying to have fun, he'll say like Redwood Cove Plus or, Arrow Lake, but you just decided to highlight just how many architectures there are to keep track of in any given Intel leak.
Yes.
Which, obviously we'll get to that. Moore's Law is Dead just put out a huge Intel leak, and while I was putting the slide together, and I do try to usually have it be one slide. I can do multiple pages, but I like it more if like over time you just see everything being leaked at once. And also, if you can't fit it on one page, I'm like, should this really just be one video? And I just saw that there was no way around it. Like, if I'm going to talk about Meteor Lake's performance estimates, I have to talk about Crestmont, Crestmont Plus, Redwood Cove Plus, Raptor Cove, Gracemont. I have to say all these things. I'm going to use abbreviations so the slide doesn't take up an entire book length. And you're just gonna have to listen to what I'm saying as I go line by line here, but it seems like it was well received, so it seems like I managed to thread that needle. But again, I was talking to one of my sources when I put that leak together, and I was like, was it a Darkmont or what the heck's in Arrow Lake? And the person goes, oh, Skymont. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that's another one of the Mont brothers. So I mean, don't worry, I forget what the architecture names are like half the time if it's not immediately what's coming out this year too, to all of those listening.
Yeah, there's too many of them, and now they're basically doing 2 architectures per year per CPU, so it's just a lot to keep track of.
Yeah. But anyways, how are you doing today, Dan?
I'm pretty good, I suppose. How are you?
I'm good. Had a pretty relaxing, or should I say less work-filled weekend than usual. I mean, it was interesting. I had my girlfriend's birthday this weekend, one of my best friend's birthdays this weekend, and then a bunch of things we wanted to do. And I was like, well, maybe we'll record early. Well, one person's busy, and then try to do this and do that. And then over time, it turned out like one of my best friends was also coming down to Nashville to hang out because his wife was doing something else in town as well. And I said, let's get this straight here. We put out a Daniel Nenny 2-hour interview on Tuesday. That same day, I put out a leak or really an analysis or opinion video about AMD margins and their recent earnings. And then there's an over 1 hour die shrink that was dropped on Friday for patrons. Your $2 a month gets you access to it, everybody. And a 37-minute Intel leak video that's doing well. I mean, that's longer than a lot of podcasts, that video alone. So 2 videos, 2 podcasts. And I said, if this comes out half a day late, is anyone going to complain?
We will survive.
I think so. And I notified the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, I think Friday night, and they said, oh no. What will we do? We're so bored with all of the lack of content. And so, yeah, I acknowledge, that patrons are probably listening to this almost a day late and non-patrons like half a day later. But, I don't know.
Please forgive us.
Please forgive us. viewer daddies, and at the end of the day, I'm starting to, the longer we do this, Dan, accept that if it would help the quality and our mental health significantly, we can be half a day late on releasing something.
Yeah.
But speaking of things that people are not okay with, let us get to the corrections for this episode. Maverick writes in, assumedly after landing a fighter jet, and he says, "Hey, Tom, I thought I'd chime in after your last Die Shrink where you discussed Nintendo. Well, I do agree with most of what you guys said. I think we have to acknowledge that Nintendo has a core philosophy that they've tried to adhere to called lateral thinking through weather technology." Now, what he's referencing here is me and you talking about how we just wish and that Nintendo would put a little more effort into optimizing their designs every generation and maybe spend an extra $10 to $30 to make sure they hit a certain level of performance for future proofing. And he goes on, the Nintendo way of adapting technology is not to look for the state of the art, but to utilize mature technology that can be mass produced cheaply. Gunpei Yokoi articulated this philosophy in his projects such as the Game Boy and Nintendo as a whole, and did this with the SNES and N64, although the N64 was also about keeping control of the entire supply chain for game cartridges versus CD, hence some of that odd design compared to PlayStation, so they could avoid people copying them. He says, I think part of the problem with Nintendo is that the company lost Gunpei and Hiroshi Yamauchi, which many credit for Nintendo's early successes and making bold and often risky decisions that did, though, pan out more often than not. You know, I'm sorry, Maverick. Actually, two things. A lot of those older Nintendo devices were less cheap for the time than others. Like Game Boy was just absurd. We did a Die Shrink on that, a year or two ago, looking at the history of handheld gaming, and we concluded that Game Boys were like all margin at some point. Like those cost nothing to make, and the other were being sold for like $80 or $100 back in the 90s. And you know, you can say it's some sort of philosophy that's thinking outside the box. I call it being cheap as hell. And I don't care what you say. They're being cheap. When they launch a Switch with Maxwell graphics after not only the Pascal SoC is out for mobile, but also a Volta SoC is out. You can't tell me this is some outside the box way of thinking. It's just lazy and cheap design, in my opinion. It's not to say that they have to do it a certain way. I'm sorry. Go on.
They're innovating by selling old products for more money, Tom, or old technology for more money. I guess you can call that a design philosophy, but it sounds like they just know they can get people to, if they can make a relatively cheap console that uses old technology, they get really high margins.
Right. And again, I want to be clear what I'm saying here. I'm not saying I think Nintendo should try to beat or match Sony or Microsoft in performance, nor performance per dollar. But I am saying that I think it's silly the Switch didn't get some early version of Volta with 8 gigabytes of RAM, because that would have cost them maybe $20 to $30, and the Switch already had insane margins. They could have charged a little more, and all of their games from start to finish would have been running max resolution at 60 frames. Even by now, if they had 8 gigabytes of RAM and Volta graphics, I am sure they would have had no issues. But I'm not saying they had to. I'm just saying it is my opinion they should.
Yeah. And I'm just hoping that the Switch 2, whenever it comes out, not that it's as powerful as a PS5 or Series X, because I doubt it will be, but, more comparable and with newer technology would be better.
And I think, you can point to, Nintendo releases like the Wii and the Switch and go, they sold crazy well and made, tons of money, so they didn't need it. I would concede, those ones probably didn't need it. But, and we've talked about this before, mostly in Die Shrink Stan, my point of view isn't so much of they should have done this to be the good guys for Switch. It's if they put that extra bit of effort into design, that extra bit of money into making it a little more future-proofed every generation, maybe they would have less disasters. If, right, you know, if some of these consoles weren't depending on perfect marketing or some moonshot goal of maybe people will care about motion controls or a hybrid mobile, home console like the Switch, if they weren't cheaping out all the time, maybe some of their other stuff wouldn't have completely fallen flat, like the Wii U, where it's like no one wanted a tablet controller and it's weak. No one bought it. If it would have been able to run all Xbox One games, it probably would have sold twice as many consoles. And if it had better online infrastructure, didn't require friend codes, then you wouldn't be reliant on that one gimmick to sell the console, and maybe you'd have less C-sign and success every generation. Yes, there'd be less profits some of the generations that didn't need it, but then the other ones would be keeping up with the competition better, so they weren't as reliant on these lateral ways of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that's been Nintendo's problem for forever, is their console is either wildly successful or it sells like 20 million units or something. And there's really not that much in between. Whereas I think Sony has consistently just made stuff that sells around 100 million for 5 generations now. Microsoft, I think, is a bit more CSI, but they consistently sell around the like 50 to 100 million range. And Nintendo, it's either 20 million or one of the best-selling consoles of all time.
Right. And like, the Xbox One, I mean, that was a little bit of a Nintendo situation where they bet on Kinect selling it, and then it didn't. But, I would actually argue their specs didn't suffer because they spent too much money on the camera. They suffered because it was just a poorly designed architecture. Like, they traded die space for, cash that they could have just used for $20 more of RAM or something. And then RAM got cheaper too, so it ended up to be a very non-prudent decision. But, at least the Xbox One didn't completely skimp on specs, and then probably would have sold even worse if it couldn't run the same games as the PS4, which is the bets Nintendo keeps making. It's not just weaker, it's like way, way, way weaker, to the point that if that gimmick doesn't sell the console, then the thing is just a complete failure. And so, yeah, that, again, I'm not, because anytime me and you talk about this in a public episode, Dan, there are comments that are like, I just don't think you get Nintendo's mentality. Yes, I do, and I disagree. Right? And I'm not saying they have to play the same game as the competition. I am saying a little extra effort, I think, in my opinion, and it is just my opinion, could go a long way. Right. We got another correction here from Bullethead. He says, magnetic tapes making hard drives obsolete. Magnetic tapes right now themselves are actually quite affordable, but the LTO drives themselves cost at minimum $4,000 new and $1,500 used. At those prices, HDDs are still a better value, since you can get multiple $100 to $140 8 terabyte drives for the cost of a used LTO drive. Also, hard drive manufacturers are beginning to produce U.2 NVMe HDDs to replace SATA and SAS connectors. That's interesting. Yeah, so they're making these smaller NVMe HDDs. That's interesting. So it's not clear when this technology will reach average consumers, but I suspect it will actually be much sooner than affordable LTO drives. Well, yeah, I don't know. I think me and you were talking about in a recent episode, Dan, how SSDs were getting so god dang dirt cheap, and they are. I mean, I upgraded my girlfriend's PC with a terabyte SSD. I added a SATA drive to it just for like older games. It's $30 for a 1 terabyte drive. And in fact, I've noticed recently 2 terabyte, I think it was an Acer one, a 2 terabyte NVMe PCIe 4.0 drive that maxes it out. So like, over 7,000 megabytes per second. It was like $130. And in 2019, I paid $150 for a 1 terabyte NVMe drive that was 5,500 megabytes a second. So you're looking at like 30% to 40% higher speeds for $20 less with double the capacity what I paid. Yeah, I mean, SSDs are getting so cheap, I'd argue that hard drives are almost entirely obsolete to the average gaming PC. It's just not worth it. It doesn't matter if you save 20%, just get a faster SSD. And then I think we talked about how magnetic drives are now
Are
pushing
getting
hard.
the tapes are getting cheaper and faster than hard drives, which I just honestly hadn't realized that magnetic tape technology had gotten to that point. And I was like, oh, this is it's kind of like the old and the newer technology are both making hard drives obsolete.
But yeah, I don't remember if I said that eventually maybe we'll just have SSDs and tape drives in PCs. Maybe I said that in kind of a throwaway line way, but certainly at those prices, no, those are nowhere near the price you would need to afford putting, some like 100 terabyte tape drive or something in your PC. Not anytime soon.
Yeah, unless you, I suppose, want to spend $4,000 for the actual drive itself and not just the tape.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that's a valid correction if I said that. I don't remember. But whether or not I did, I think it's also an interesting thing to bring up that we are still well away from that coming to consumers. And I just wanted to kind of make this PSA. Guys, if you've been waiting to upgrade your SSDs, like you're deleting games every week, pay $30 and just throw an extra SSD in your system.
Even if it's just a SATA one, which isn't as good as NVMe, but
indubitably. And well, you were talking, Dan. I tried to think of some good segue for story number one, but unfortunately, my brain is not as hot as AMD CPUs allegedly were in recent reporting. And yeah, that's story number one. AMD AM5 CPU burning issues tested by Gamers Nexus. First, there was the Nvidia 16-pin failure saga, and then people freaked out about RDNA 3 vapor chamber issues, and now there have been reports on Reddit and other discussion boards of yet some other failure that people are freaking out about online. Recent motherboard vendor BIOS updates have fried some Zen 5 CPUs, especially some R7-7800X3D CPUs. Now, this is my summary after watching the Gamers Nexus story and talking to some contacts. However, unlike the 16-pin and RDNA 3 vapor chamber stories, this channel hesitated to jump to any conclusions until a couple weeks after initial reports in order to avoid misreporting the situation. And as luck would have it, Gamers Nexus has now tested the issue with these overall conclusions. Number one, Expo and AMD's own software does not seem to be the culprit. Number two, although Gamers Nexus could fry several CPUs, they found it was honestly hard to do, even when they were trying to, although they could eventually, if they tried long and hard enough, repeat a failure. It also does seem like recent BIOS updates, especially those from Asus and Gigabyte, are to blame mostly, and fixes are already out. All known failures are handled in exchanges or have been refunded. And so I guess what you would say is AMD should try to do more to keep motherboard makers stay in check with their updates so they don't push voltages too high in the future. But at the same time, there is only so much AMD can realistically do to control their vendors. And on that last point, yours truly did personally reach out to a few people in the industry, and I can independently report that nobody is seeing any significant uptick in failures or returns of AM5 CPUs right now compared to usual. And one person did press me with the opinion that this person thinks AMD in no way can afford to be responsible for validating every single update themselves on every single motherboard model for every vendor. Intel probably couldn't afford to do that either. So maybe AMD can do some minor things to rein in vendors in the future, but they're going to be minor. People may just need to also accept that if you use a beta version of a BIOS update in overclock, there are risks. So yeah, in conclusion, I would say this ranks way below the 7900 XTX vapor chamber issue, and then also below NVIDIA's 16-pin issues in level of seriousness. The vapor chamber issue was a notable real issue that maybe only affected 10% of the first wave of buyers, but it was real and then quickly fixed. The NVIDIA 16-pin failure issue, according to people I talked to this day, is actually a real ongoing issue, but it affects a teeny tiny, almost negligible amount of consumers. And then below that level of seriousness, this is as close to a nothing burger as you can get to. At least that's what I concluded looking at everything online, Dan. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this.
I mean, from a public perception perspective, I think this is doing seemingly a lot of damage to AMD. I don't know how many
Well, at
people
least in
this.
online discussions, we don't know if
That's
it's
true.
affecting sales literally at all.
I guess I don't know how many people this affected. We probably will never know. It seems like it's on the. It seems like it's probably around the same order of magnitude, maybe a little less than the 16-pin debacle from Nvidia, but it, as usual, it seems like it's a weird mix of possibly user error, maybe getting a slightly crappy CPU, and irresponsible power profiles from a few motherboard vendors. That led that when you get all of those together, you get like a dozen CPUs having burn marks on them or something. Because as far as I can tell, that seems to be the order that it's at. Like on Reddit, there's 3 or 4 reports, and then it seems like there's 3 or 4 more reports about it elsewhere. So I don't think this is a widespread issue where 10% of people with 7800 X3Ds are burning. But
I mean, look, we concluded with the NVIDIA 16-pin issue that it does seem like the clip could be a little better designed. And so there is some user error there, but there's probably a notable amount of people that have been affected. In fact, one person that I personally know just had a 16-pin break and had to get it fixed. But it's not like, it was anything broke, nothing lit on fire, and it seems very rare. The amount of complaints online about this seem to be like a tenth of the NVIDIA 16-pin thing.
Yeah, so if I'm remembering correctly, on Reddit, they had for the 16-pin back when it was in its biggest point of discussion. So, like, I believe that was like late October, early November of 2022. By the end of them compiling that list, which they compiled over the course of about 3 weeks, there was like 30 or so reports that r/NVIDIA had compiled. But I'll also give it to the mods at r/NVIDIA. I think they do a good job running the subreddit and like keeping track of things like that. Whereas I'm not sure if like r/AMD is as good at compiling that type of stuff. But yeah, it looks like it's 3 or 4 reports on Reddit. Obviously, that's not like a poll, so you don't know if how many outside of Reddit there are, and then you have a couple reports online outside of Reddit. So it doesn't seem like it's this massive thing, but I think it still is doing damage to their public perception, where some people are saying online, like, well, maybe I won't get this because I don't want to have to worry about this issue, even though if you're not doing anything weird with your CPU, you're not going to have this issue. And even if you are, you're probably not going to have this issue.
When I say people are saying online, that reminds me of when you see people on like CNN going, one random asshole on Twitter said, it's like, this is news. Some guy, who do we know? This is even like, I don't know. I put zero credence into something like that. And the people I talk to at like Micro Centers and Best Buy, so it's like zero uptick in returns, none. So I'm sorry, guys. This is a nothing burger. This is nothing. This is if Gamers Nexus had to try to break them, and he could, but he said he had to try even with the problem ones. And so it's not to say no one had an issue, but it is to say there was bad BIOS updates. They've been fixed, and maybe 5 people had issues. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's good that AMD jumped on it pretty quickly once it became public. I mean, obviously, you never know if they knew this was an issue, and because if they knew this was an issue prior, you'd think to just push a BIOS update.
Yeah,
like that's
once they did. Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's good that AMD jumped on it seemingly within a few days of all of these reports happening, which I don't know. Maybe it was just a simpler issue than what caused the like 16-pin issues at Nvidia, which might be why.
It seems like they still need another update. Like they've just locked down part of the BIOS for a voltage setting until they put out a true repeatable fix that allows the same overclocking you could do before. So technically you could argue this is still an ongoing issue, but I don't know. I guess just to make everyone understand where I'm coming from on how much it sounds like I'm disregarding this. when I saw all of the tweeting and the articles and a big thumbnail from Gamers Nexus, and then I did my own research finally on this because this just wasn't at the top of my priority list compared to like, leaking Arrow Lake information. I expected way more than this, to be honest, guys. Like the amount of conversation about this, I was like, that's it. Like, and Gamers Nexus basically ends the video by saying it wasn't AMD's fault and it's already fixed.
Well,
I don't know.
I think consumers are just becoming more and more hyper aware of really minor things that affect products because everybody's talking about them online all the time. Where it's like something like this will get as much airtime as like something that like 30% of Xbox 360s failing within 2 years.
Yeah, I know.
You would have gotten in the mid 2010s. Where, over like a couple week long news cycle, something like this can seem like it's as big of a deal as like 30 to 50% of 360s failing within 2 years of you buying it. And it's just not that big of an issue. People just talk about everything way more because it's easier to. More people have Reddit accounts than they used to in 2008. If Reddit was, I think Reddit would have been around in 2008, but.
Well, yeah. So, and certainly this issue is not limited to our space. I don't know if you guys have watched 24-hour news channels, but it seems like they always just need something to talk about that day. And it doesn't really matter the veracity or the legitimacy of a story half the time. It's just like, well, this is what we're talking about now. A Twitter poll about what was it, gas stoves or something. It's like, oh my God, you guys. But I don't know. So yeah, I guess I don't know if you have anything else to say about this, Dan. I mean, it was an issue, but very, 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 but not something that is like a major long-term issue for AM5, nor it's already solved and didn't affect almost anyone.
What I would say is I wouldn't be overly concerned. And if new things come out about AMD CPUs burning up after the BIOS is released or something, then I would get concerned.
Maybe. I want a video
but
of
I don't think that
fire.
will happen. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, and just, this is a reason I don't use beta BIOSes unless I absolutely have to. I use the studio version of NVIDIA's drivers too. I just don't get the point anymore. I mean, we're to a point where performance is so zeroed in and the gains you get from messing with stuff is so little that it's like, just go for stability, guys. And again, surprise, that thing they put on everything that says overclocking, voids warranty, may have problems. They do put that there for an issue, for a reason, even though it's rarely an issue, Mm-hmm. This piece of content is brought to you by Silver Knight PCs. Silver Knight PCs is a disabled, veteran-owned GPU and CPU retailer, PC repair shop, and boutique PC builder that is located in North Carolina, but ships globally. They do it all. If you are in the area, drop by their location at 1324 Bragg Boulevard in Fayetteville, North Carolina to pick up reasonably priced components that come with up to a 3-year warranty, and you can even trade in parts for refurbishment as well, or go to their website and use their new PC customization tool to put together the blueprints for your dream PC that they will be happy to consult with you on before building and shipping it to you. They're easy to talk to. The owner of the company even sat down and had a candid conversation with me during the pandemic shortages years ago, and so I know from firsthand experience that they do a good job. In fact, the RTX 4090 Supreme Liquid in my PC used to render this ad was sent to me by them after having its thermal paste and pads custom upgraded. So I know they ship high quality stuff, and whether you're in the Fayetteville area looking to buy a graphics card in person, or you want to custom order something from them online, or even shop on their eBay store, click the link in the description and use offer code BrokenSilicon to get 6% off all orders. This helps me a lot, this helps them, and I am genuinely happy to get their sponsorship, as they really are a business that I can stand by as genuinely reliable. Go to silverknightpcs.com and use offer code BrokenSilicon today. All right. But let us now move on to story number 2. AdoredTV leaks Lateral 3 for Zen 5, while DigiTimes seemingly confirms Moore's Law has dead Zen 5 leaks. Recently, Jim at AdoredTV gave us all a peek into why Zen 5 may possibly be achieving such massive IPC gains, despite allegedly only getting a small L1 cache increase, according to this channel. It seems that Zen 5 may use what is called a Ladder L3 cache system for the first time for AMD. Now, what does this really mean? Honestly, skipping the technical details, the way this writer would summarize it is AMD is evolving the architecture Zen 5 in fundamental ways that they haven't done since Excavator to Zen 1. This is like when AMD went from crossbars in Zen 2 to ring buses in Zen 3, or even bigger than that. You don't always need to add a bunch of cache for an IPC increase. They're just fundamentally redesigning the architecture. And Jim gave us a little peek into what some of those changes are. Jim also talked about various prototypes with different cache amounts being tested. That many websites misquoted him as saying the exact cache amounts of Zen 5, even though if literally any of these rumor mill websites would have watched the video, they would have heard him distinctly say he doesn't know what these prototypes are for. They could be throwaway prototypes from before Zen 4 or Zen 6. And me talking to people, it does seem like this is probably Zen 6 variants being tested with the L2 and L3 caches he talked about for some other thing. And AdoredTV confirmed a lot of the code names that I leaked, and then DigiTimes did as well, like Hotpoint, Kraken, Escher, and so on and so forth. So again, those Zen 5 leaks that just came out of this channel, you take them to the bank. All right. Any thoughts on this story, Dan?
I'm just looking. So from a technical standpoint, just I guess what this is supposed to theoretically give core lower latency between cores on the same bus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I guess there you go for why it might be faster, Tom.
Exactly. Which, if we were to try to go into it in too much detail, we'd just be way beyond our depth. We're not CPU engineers here. But I think this is important, though, because I do remember that, like, when I did that Cinebench leak, I said to myself, well, okay, so here in Windows Task Manager, it says more L1, but no increase in L2 and L3. And then I asked if there was any mistakes here. Someone who works on these chips said, no, he doesn't believe there is. And then I talked to another source after that video came out, and that person told me, as far as they're aware, there is nothing off in those cache reportings. And so I was like, well, I don't know. It looks like AMD's got maybe around a 20% or more IPC increase for Zen 5, and they didn't need to add a bunch of cache. And they did that with Zen 2 to Zen 3. So,
I mean, yeah. Really, at a certain point, the only way you could improve that is by making the cores communicate better with each other then.
But yeah, and in the past, there's been a lot of people that have doubted when there can be large IPC increases. I think some people would look at Raptor Lake, which added a ton more cache over Alder Lake, and they're like, 0 IPC increase? What the heck? And then AMD adds a little L1 cache, and then 20% IPC increase. But a lot of that is timing. Like, it takes like 3 to 5 years to just have some of the smartest people on earth sit down and go, what tiny thing can we do here, and then do 100 little micro changes, and maybe one big fundamental change that you then have to simulate, make sure it would actually work, and then implement to get a similar die size architecture that gets that level of a performance increase at same power. But if you're Intel and you're like, oh crap, Meteor Lake's delayed, what can we do to make Alder Lake better? Clock it faster. Oh, it loses performance per clock at high clock speeds. Add a ton of cache so it scales to 6 gigahertz. And that's what they did with Raptor Lake. It's not a mystery. It's just usually, and same with like Zen 3 X3D. It's like, well, then how did they? It's like, well, yeah, it's the same architecture, but they added a bunch of cache. That's what they decided to do that time. That took not 4 or 5 years to design from the ground up, right? So that's why.
As a callback to Yokoi from Nintendo, it's lateral thinking instead of vertical
Indeed.
thinking.
Kraus writes in, "Hi, Tom and Dan. I thought your Strix Halo leak was excellent, and really, it's a very cool product. But I do want to push back a little bit on your statements that maybe this could allow laptop gaming performance on battery, a claim from a recent Broken Silicon podcast. But before I do so, I do think that I want to put forth two ground rules to frame where I'm coming from. Number one, I believe it's well accepted that 3 hours gaming on battery is the sweet spot, or a minimum to be considered a usable level of battery gaming time. Number two, I believe the maximum battery allowed on airplanes is 100 watt hours, that no laptop maker has nor ever will exceed this, which is why to this day now you're seeing 16-inch laptops with empty space inside them because they've innovated on batteries enough to make 99.9 watt hour batteries that fit in less space than before, and they don't know what to do with the extra space. That kind of sucks. With this rules in mind, the natural TDP for the Strix Halo APU seems to be somewhere around 30 watts on battery. So this might use like 100 watts at the outlet. And sure, run circles around a 3070 laptop on battery. But on 30 watts, I think you're more looking at the 1660 Ti range. Alternatively, you take the devil's bargain and maybe run 45 to 50 watt TDP on battery. But then you're going to get under 2 hours of battery life. And that's with a laptop weighing quite a bit too, probably around 5 pounds to carry the kit. What do you think laptop makers will do? And do you see my point that this might not really be a laptop battery gaming APU? Well, I don't know. I don't really agree to the ground rules as being necessary for this to be a achievement. You know, like I think right now, a lot of the MacBook benchmarks where they have like 1660 battery life or 1660 or 1650 performance in like Shadow of the Tomb Raider. They're like, you get 2 to 3 hours of battery life gaming and its full performance. I don't think it needs to be 3 hours minimum. I think the fact that if I'm on a flight and I pull it open and I can play Tomb Raider at full settings, I would plugged in on the wall and it's just 2 hours. That still might be enough to get me through a flight. And I think that means in mixed usage where you're using the GPU sometimes, you're going to get significantly longer without having to sometimes throttle the GPU performance. And so I don't really agree with those ground rules. I still think it is a gaming on battery achievement, even if it's just, a 1.5 to 2.5 hours. And even if there were like a small hit to performance. But the other thing I'd say, Crast, is I have documents that literally say the low-end models compete with a 4050, which is around 2060 performance. So no, I think that that's a 20 watt model that can game like a 2060, and that would, when you add everything else in, get you at least 3 hours of battery life. No, the 120 watt model won't be gaming at full performance on battery, right?
Well, that is impossible, so yes.
Right, so obviously that's understood, but still, that means you could take something that's gaming like a 3070 and maybe then it drops to 3060 performance on battery and can game for an hour and a half. I still see that as a gaming on battery major achievement. And I think it's worth pointing out that the Nvidia Intel laptops I've gamed on are like crazy locked down and like what you're able to do with them when you're on battery. Like it just ignores half of my overclocks and like throttles the dang thing to half clock speeds. Like really, really nerfs my performance. If there's no, like, especially with like the 20 to 65 watt models, if there's no like crazy throttling on battery, that means I might be able to keep my afterburner or whatever overclocks going. And that means I could maybe undervolt it even further and maybe push the battery life in a way that I just can't, where when it switches to battery, because they're kind of doing this for safety reasons. So you don't damage the battery trying to game at full capacity. It just nerfs any ability to do anything as long as it can fit even just barely within that battery supply without having to switch a bunch of settings around. That means that you'll be able to tweak it and probably get significantly better performance than you would otherwise as well.
Yeah, and it's if this gets down to 20 or even 30 watts, I don't see why that wouldn't give you 2 hours with a 100 watt hour battery, right? Like, yeah. Now, I guess I'm trying to think of what comparable product AMD has out right now, like to give us how much wattage does the 7600 mobile versions use?
Well, I don't remember off the top of my head for those since they just came out, but I do know that the 6500M, which I believe is like literally just a 6500 XT or 6400 limited to 25 watts. It's limited to 25 watts. So like one of those, and this is something that's bigger than that. So yeah, I think most of these are going to use 65 to 95 watts though for the 7600. I guess I kind of can't answer it.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I think if you're expecting a better performance per watt, then, you would expect something better, a little bit better than what AMD has right now for 30 watts, right?
Yes. The 30 watt variant should perform well. I don't know. I'd say probably the 45 watt variant will game like a 7600 if I had to guess.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so, we're going from gaming at like 2/3 the performance, if you're lucky, by the way, with some of these laptops, to a 7600 plus Phoenix system, or probably 7600 plus Rembrandt system is what the bundle would be, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And that will last for 45 minutes or something to now you've got 2 hours of battery life and it performs 50% better. No, I don't think it's like you're gaming for an hour on like a 1660 Ti. I think you'll be gaming for 2 hours like a 3060 with some of these things, or 2060. And I think that's huge. That's a like doubling. That's a huge increase. And again, what that means is it fundamentally changes what you can do when you're on a plane. You could limit frame rates, and now instead of struggling in 720p with your 4050, like, no, maybe not 4050, but with your 3060 laptop, you're now not struggling playing at the same settings as always, and it lasts 2 hours. That's huge.
Yeah, and it's probably a far less bulky laptop, which is a big plus on while traveling.
Right. So instead of having this 16-inch laptop that kind of has to be 16-inch to fit all the cooling, but there's still some empty space because the battery can't get bigger, you have half the cooling. You're just cooling an APU. You can make this now a 13-inch laptop that games like a high-end one. I mean, you have a netbook now that can game like a high-end laptop for hours. That's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah.
All right. Let us move on then to story number 3. We've already been bringing this thing up. RX 7600 8GB leaks recap and a minor update once again. Over the past few weeks, Moore's Law is Dead has been dropping a steady trickle for AMD's hot pink Bonefish RDNA 3 die to swim through. Yes, that was very stressed like thing I did there, but code name for this Navi 33 is hot pink Bonefish, and I am trickling leaks for it to swim through, damn. Now, here's the summary so far of what's been leaked by this channel. Number 1, there are currently 8GB Navi 33 desktop samples benchmarking above 10% better than the 6650 XTL, consuming a little more than 170 watts. Press sampling for this product should begin on May 15th. MSRP reviews happen on May 24th, and the day after initial reviews, above MSRP reviews happen with the release date. So AMD's doing MSRP controls like Nvidia did for the 4070. Yeah. Also, there will be a reference model to anchor pricing, and the name on documentation so far has been the RX 7600 8GB, so not an XT. And on top of all of that, it does seem, and this is the new information, although AMD was planning to charge a bit over $300 a month ago, recently today, I was told that AMD may be targeting a price of $300 or lower. To be clear, what I can literally confirm as new information today is that, number 1, the BOM kit for the 7600, I am told, allows standard profit margins between $270 and $290 for pre-tax sales price. And number 2, AMD is considering a $300 price point as the final price. So in summary, AMD will be launching a new low-end 8GB GPU in 2 weeks with pricing controls in place that should at a minimum ensure this graphics card costs the same or less than its predecessor. And AIBs should be able to keep prices as low as they want, maybe even launching products below MSRP if AMD chooses a boneheaded MSRP for this hot pink Bonefish. All right, Dan. Yes, I decided to make a Bonefish reference again there. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I feel like I feel like they're not all that different than when we've talked about this before. Just if they can't manage to sell this for $300 or less, almost don't put it out, right? I mean,
Right.
they're going to put it out regardless, but what you're describing to me is essentially a 8 gigabyte 6700, right? And
pretty much best case scenario, slightly better than that. Yeah.
so it needs to be cheaper than what I can buy, or it needs to be cheaper than a 6700 for me, or not me because I'm not going to buy this, but for the thought for me to consider like this being worth buying for anyone. So, it's just if this comes out at like $330, then it's just a non-starter.
Right, which is what its predecessor cost at launch. Yeah, and I just checked Newegg right now while we were talking. The 6710 gigabyte is $280 new on Newegg, and it also, I believe, comes with a game. It comes with The Last of Us, so yeah, I don't know, which was just patched to run fine on this 10 gigabyte card, apparently. So
which it's just like that's the problem with these. Lovelace and RDNA 3 is everything not at the enthusiast tier is basically just an advertisement for RDNA 2. And this could be good if they manage to price it for below $300. Good job, AMD. You've released a card for not a terrible price. But if not, it's just get a 6700 if you're waiting on getting a card.
Which I did tweet that out, I believe. Like, it doesn't really matter what AMD decides to do. It's not going to be something that makes you regret getting the 6700 if you're a budget shopper. It's $280, close to PlayStation 5 performance, probably better in some games, worse in others.
Yeah.
It has 10 gigs of RAM. It actually uses like, I think 175 watts. So I'm not even sure Navi 33 will be more efficient, which why would it? Same family of node. And you get 10 gigs of RAM. I don't know. I think that's the move. If you're a budget shopper, don't wait for anything. Worst case scenario, AMD will launch something for the same price that's a little stronger but has less RAM in 2 weeks. Just get this.
Yeah, and it's just like, I think a narrative that's just coming from this channel, the more that we talk about it, is 8 gigabytes. An 8 gigabyte card is basically by definition low tier. Low end at this point.
It is.
10 gigabytes is arguably getting there too, but 2 more gigabytes is still 2 more gigabytes.
Yeah, I guess the final thing I would add, and we have, talked about this product a ton on every, broken silicon for the past, and loose ends for like the past 2 months, that, I'll just also add this. Remember, there were rumors, including for me, that the Navi 33 products were supposed to launch at the same time or possibly even before Navi 31. AMD buys capacity ahead of time. There's a very good chance, like you said, they're going to launch this, that they have to. They just have them sitting there.
Yeah.
And they may have for a very long time. So, I don't know. They're going to have to launch this. I think what AMD is going to do is go to the lowest price they can stomach that is just barely not making them out to lunch. My suggestion, and I don't think it's completely finalized, but my suggestion will be that would be $299. That wouldn't be greatly received, I don't think, but I think anything above $299 is where people go, you're asleep at the wheel. And the good news is, though, is that they have left enough margin at whatever the MSRP ends up being that AIV is going to, I've heard, maybe sell this for even less than MSRP, even on launch day. And certainly if it doesn't sell well, you'll see price drops quickly. So it's one to watch, because if you're in the budget market, this may drop with a free game for like $270 for a couple of entry models, or at least under $300. And eventually maybe the 6700 will sell out. At least it should be. It's one of the best deals I've seen in a while. We keep talking about what's the next Polaris going to be. Guys, a 10 gigabyte card that performs like the consoles is $280. This is the new Polaris. But so just wanted to get that summary out there, because I have been trickling out leaks and tweets and videos and live streams, and thought it'd be good to summarize them again for this one. QH Freddy writes in, Navi 33 must be incredibly cheap for AMD to make. It is. It's on N6, it has a small die size, and it should require only very basic boards. To me, at least, it seems nonsensical to not go for the $200 to $250 segment. I don't see how Nvidia can willingly compete at that price range, even with their smallest Lovelace chip. Why wouldn't AMD do this? Nvidia would have no way to respond. I don't know. I mean, anytime I ask people that, the answer is basically, well, you have to understand, and then there's this, and also eventually we want to make APUs occupy the low end. And I just go, yeah, well, sure. When your cheapest card is on 3 nanometer, you'll have a point. This isn't. So all I know is you are selling 6500 XTs with 4 gigabytes for $200. You've added $15 of silicon, $20 worth of RAM. Shouldn't be. I think $250 is a good price, and if it's over $300, you're dumb. And there's nothing anyone will be able to do to convince me otherwise, because their margins don't lie.
I mean, I think at $300, it's okay, but honestly,
it's not a slap in the face.
I hope reviewers pan it for the price if it's $300, because I completely agree. Like, just like looking at this card versus what's available on the market, if we're not trying to shake up the boat at all, I mean, rock the boat at all as it comes to price performance as it currently exists, then this thing should be like $250, $260
right.
At most.
And at $250, I mean, I'm not going to get excited for a new 8 gigabyte GPU in 2023, but that is where it almost is like in a similar argument to the 6500 XT, where it's like, hey, it's better than everything else out. If you have to go bare minimum, this is an improvement. And on that note, though, I've been thinking actually, damn, if AMD goes above $300 for the MSRP, I already think I know how I will start my analysis video. I'll say, when the 6500 XT came out, AMD launched a graphics card with the minimum amount of RAM that you could argue a GPU should have for 30% less than every other available thing on the market, including 1650s. And, I mean, 1050 Ti's were selling for $200 at the time. And immediately after the 6500 XT launch, all those cards got price drops. Even though everyone hated that card, apparently it did help the market. This time, if AMD goes above 300, it's worse than the 6500 XT, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why I might have been able to defend, although I certainly didn't like the 6500 XT, and I just could not defend this. Like, this would be the dumbest thing ever.
If AMD makes this $330, your analysis video should be 5 seconds long, and it should just be no. That's the end of the video.
Well, Dan, I think I have minimum requirements for being able to have a sponsorship in there, so it'd have to at least.
So it would have to be longer than 5 seconds.
We could just 10 minutes of me saying no, maybe, but yeah.
That will be my competing analysis video.
Oh shoot, Dan's
with the channel I'm about to launch.
Civil War in the Moore's Law's Dead Family.
Oh Lord.
Suspicious Angry White Man writes in and he says, "Hello Tom, I've been watching since just before your Nvidia's Ultimate Play video, and this is my first time writing in as I just subbed to the Patreon. Well, welcome. I may be a little late or early to ask this, as Computex is right around the corner, but there have been rumors about AMD showcasing only the RX 7600 series at Computex this year, which I believe is in 2 weeks, when this comes out, while supposedly putting the RX 7800 and 7700 series of cards on the back burner for the time being, maybe all the way until late summer. Can you provide any insight as to why they might do this, or have already decided to do this? Because personally, I'm hoping AMD is trying to fix or figure out what's causing performance issues with Navi 31 and 32 before releasing the 7800 XT and 7700 XT. Keep up the good work." Honestly, I would say, why launch a 7800 XT based on Navi 31 if it won't be an obviously better option than the 6950 XT? Frankly, this is the same thing me and you were just saying. Why launch a 7600X? Yeah, why launch a 7600 8 gigabyte for more than a 6700 10 gigabyte? Why? And so why launch a 7800 XT for the same price as a 6950 XT that's probably a little more performant?
Yeah, and
if you can avoid it, just don't manufacture it. And remember, I said Navi 33 was supposed to come out at the same time or before Navi 31. So for all we know, they have tons of these things sitting in warehouses they need to get rid of. Not the case probably with Navi 32. Don't even make it yet. Plus, people are buying up the 7900 XTX. Yeah,
and honestly, there's no real reason for them to release their 7700 and 7800 lines until there's like a feature like RDNA 3, or I'm assuming that will
FSR 3, you mean?
why did I say RDNA? Yeah, FSR3.
I can promise you it will feature RDNA 3.
I'm not sure if FSR3 will be compatible with RDNA 2. But there,
I think it will be, but I have personally heard rumblings, and I've leaked this before, that there could be a version of RDNA 3, if not at launch, but sometime in the future that only works because of the hardware in RDNA 3. So that is a thing that could be a factor, but so far I wouldn't say that's going to be here right away.
I just don't see a reason, though, why they would release their mid-range GPUs without some feature to accentuate them with versus the offerings they already have. Like, so without FSR 3.0 or without, what are they calling their competitor to DLSS 3? Fluid frames, I believe.
I think it's fluid frames or fluid motion, yeah.
If they don't have one of those two features to compete with it, to make the RDNA 3 look better than RDNA 2, it's just, there's no reason to put it out.
Yeah, and so again, don't worry, suspicious angry white man, which we have our eye on you.
Yes.
And get less angry. I don't know if you've seen the news. We don't need any more suspicious angry white men right now. But like, if you want a budget card, just get the 6700. If you want a decent 4K gaming card with enough VRAM, 6800's under 500, 6950 XT's around 600. Mm-hmm. You can get it now. I don't think you're going to regret it.
Yeah.
AMD kind of needed to launch Navi 31 and 33 at a certain point. 32 was always, you can go watch my old leaks, always going to come out way later. Well, so if they haven't started producing it yet, or if they haven't at least produced it in great quantities, switch that capacity, which it uses the same MCDs, by the way, and a different, 5 nanometer is at least the same node used for the GCD. Just make more 7900 XTXs, because there's literally no point in launching a 6900 XT for 6950 XT pricing or something. Why? Ever feel like a dog chasing its tail as you scour dozens of eBay postings and seedy websites looking for a safe way to get reasonably priced Microsoft software? Well, you don't have to do that. Just go to cdkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by cdkeyoffer.com that offers both Microsoft operating systems, Office products, select games, and even some gaming hardware peripherals for reasonable prices. And they've been a sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead and the entire team here for years for a reason. They've been good to me. They've been good to Dan. They've been good to dozens of me and Dan's family members and friends for years now. And they've also been good to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So whether you're looking for Steam, EA, Uplay, or PlayStation keys, or of course Microsoft products or gaming peripherals, support Moore's Law is Dead by using the offer code BrokenSilicon for 25% off all Microsoft products and Die Shrink for 3% off everything else on the website. Support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting one of our best long-term sponsors, cdkeyoffer.com, today. Mazaria writes in and says, given the generally negative reception of AMD's low-end RDNA 2 GPUs, how likely do you think it is that an RDNA 3 analog to the RX 6400 will come along? I value the 6400's performance in low power and in low profile applications where PCIe cables aren't available, but something better and with more VRAM would be excellent. 0.
I mean, I feel like if we get a 7500 XT, I feel like it's just going to be another
33.
Yeah, obviously. But I feel like there's a good chance that it's just going to be another 6500 XT, like how the 6500 XT basically was a 5500 XT and so on.
Like, I think what you would see is either, and I hope this isn't the decision they would make, a 4 gigabyte Navi 33 card that's heavily cut down for like 150, and they'd be like, it's what would that be? Then they'd be like, it's 6600 performance with half the RAM, so you can't run half of the new games. I guess they could do that. Or I think the better choice, a 96-bit bus with 6 gigabytes for like 180, 7500 XT. And they're like, look, it's a 6 gigabyte 6600 XT, or 6600 for half the price of what the 6600 was. But I think that's all you're going to see. I don't think you're going to see another like $140 64-bit card anytime soon. And from what I've heard from actually many contexts, both at AMD and outside of it, these 24 dies, these 4 dies, I should say, so 24, hypothetically in this generation would be 34. They're probably a thing of the past, just like the 108 dies are for NVIDIA. Like, there's no point in making these micro GPUs anymore. People already hate them, and APUs are stronger than them. So what's the point?
Yeah.
All right. Let us then move on to story number 4. AMD reports Q1 2023 earnings, and I'm quoting here from Anantech. Today we have the yin to Intel's yang. AMD, the number 2 x86 chip and discrete GPU maker, has been enjoying a growing diet of Intel's lunch for much of the past 2 years, but like the rest of the tech industry, AMD is now seeing a significant drop-off in sales as business and consumers are alike curtailing tech spending and what is at least being regarded and acted around as a recession. For the first quarter of 2023, AMD has reported $5.4 billion in revenue, continuing the year-over-year slide they've been experiencing throughout the past few quarters. All told, AMD's top-line revenue dropped by 9% versus Q1 2022, which is a much smaller drop than some of its rivals, but it is a situation that has probably been artificially buoyed by the Xilinx acquisition. That acquisition, which closed it late into Q1 of 2022, has boosted AMD's revenue significantly on a year-over-year basis for the past few quarters. The additional revenue and sales that Xilinx has brought to the table has shifted AMD in some important ways, but it hasn't helped to halt the fundamental drop in sales that the tech industry itself is facing lately. As a result, the hit to AMD's income has been significant. Operating income dropped by 115% to negative $145 million, and net income saw a similar dive into the red with a 118% drop for a final tally of a $139 million loss. By the way, last time I talked to Daniel Nenny, that last Broken Silicon, there were a significant amount of comments that said, how can you have a over 100% drop? Guys, it went from profit to loss. That's how. Anyways, though far from rival Intel's record-breaking loss, the most recent quarter is still a black eye for the black team, who previously had been enjoying a run-up in business over the past several years on the back of the Zen renaissance. The one silver lining, though, is that AMD's core businesses as a whole have remained profitable. Overall margins for the company remain around 50%, and honestly, looking forward, AMD's recovery plans look a lot like the rest of the industry. It's not like you can say they're handling this any worse than anyone else. If Q1 is the bottom, then things will be marginally better in Q2, and to that end, AMD is currently projecting $5.3 billion plus or minus $300 million in revenue for Q2, which would be a 19% year-over-year decline. The real recovery in the client and data center spaces is not expected, though, until the second half of this year, when AMD hopes to resume modest growth in those segments. And so, yeah, there you go. That was the write-up. I thought it was well written. Not a good quarter, but overall, I think you'd say the company seems healthy. And the only thing I'd add on to this write-up, and I did do a video about this, about talking about how AMD can afford to give us VRAM for reasonable amounts of money, is that, well, many of AMD's segments weren't good. Their gaming revenue, which includes graphics cards, is, fine, and the margins remain healthy there. So AMD is not losing a bunch of money on these discount RDNA 2 graphics cards. If they can afford to sell Navi 23 for under 300, 33 has a smaller die size, they can afford to sell this for cheap, guys. They can certainly afford to sell Navi 32 for 550 or less. But anyways, what do you think about AMD's earnings, Dan?
Oh, we're in a recession? ? That's what it's felt like for the past year. Well,
so far, you'd say, I would say it's a light recession.
Yeah. And I think the tech industry in particularly is being hit hard by it because, I don't know, the floor seemed to just fall out from under them with demand because I think a lot of consumers just got tired of putting up with it. The floor in demand, the drop in demand has been interesting to me, at least with consumer. As far as like data center goes, I don't know nearly as well what drives those changes in demand. I assume it's just generally the market is contracting.
I think it's similar. Right, this is something that I remember saying a lot last year on Broken Silicon after Broken Silicon, Dan. I know it seems like there are no graphics cards on the market. I know they're hard to get, and I know they're overpriced, but they are selling out to someone, and it's not all miners. Yes, miners made a significant amount of sales, especially for Nvidia, and well, significant for AMD, just not as significant as compared to Nvidia. But it wasn't half of the sales, I don't think. It may have been at most a third from Nvidia is the estimate I've seen. And they had crazy record-breaking sales numbers. So eventually, and I said this so many times, I said eventually, I think people are going to be surprised that these cards are selling out because someone's actually buying them. And eventually, the number of people who will pay too much for a graphics card, it's a finite amount of people. And I think what we're seeing now is that number's gone. And how much are people willing to spend now? Probably what they were before. And for data center, damn, we had a pandemic. People stuck inside. They needed more servers. They bought them up. Now they've already bought them. They don't need as many probably this year.
Or they don't need to expand as much as they would have previous. Oh, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I also think, once again, we've talked about that before, is there's been a pushback too, where I think a lot of people are, the way they're reacting is maybe for a while some people would have been willing to pay slightly more than what they would have in the past. And now people are fed up with the market. So it seems like they just want pricing to fall precipitously forever, which is good on one end. But I do think some of the discussion you see online verges on unrealistic and a little cartoonish what you expect out of the market. But
well, yeah, it's that backlash of like, in fact, as the prices continue to go down faster and faster, it makes people feel less pressure to buy now, and more people keep waiting. Like I know you were kind of interested in eventually getting a Navi 31 card if they ever get to $700, and it might, Dan. But you've been like, well, I don't know though. If it gets to 700, should I wait longer? And by the way, on that note, I think I had a dream I bought you a 7900 XT last night. I'm just now realizing that.
Oh, that wasn't a dream, Tom. You did that.
Shoot, I gotta stop drinking and taking medicine before I go to bed. No, but yeah, I think I had that dream, and in the dream you were just like, yeah, I want it, Tom, get it. I was like, okay, Dan, are you sure? I don't know. You're very mad I didn't get it already.
Yeah, well, it's probably me, the angry text messages I keep sending you about you not buying me a 7900 XT already, Tom.
It's weird. They've been coming from an anonymous account on email address that's just my social security number, and I'm watching you. That's you?
Yes. I guess I'll confirm that now.
You got a weird way of doing pranks, Dan.
They call me the prankster.
Someone would call it harassment, but no. Anyways, though, yeah, it's funny. I had a dream about that, but I think you'll agree, right? Me and you are less pressed to get things because we keep seeing prices go down, and that's probably part of some of that whiplash effect where people are even less willing to buy, even though prices have gone down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true because I'm somewhat interested in the 7900 XT at like 700 or 750. But, if it were more similar to what the market was a year and a half ago, I don't know, maybe I would jump on like one flash crashing to like $780 or something.
Or 800 maybe even. Because you're like, oh, wow, it's actually, some crazy deal somewhere on eBay. But
although I do think as a matter of principle, like 7900 XT should be like 25% cheaper than the 7900 XTX at least. But
it should be, and if we're being honest, it's the 7800 XT. Costs more to make than the 6800 XT did, but I don't think it costs more than 10-20% more. So I think the fair price is 700-750 in aligned, sales. Assuming we agree that companies shouldn't always be able to get higher margins every generation. I don't remember when we all agreed that was something that we should accept.
Or that's as a consumer, that's what you should want? Question mark.
I don't know. I swear there's some people that fall into that argument at some point. But yeah, so anyways, though, AMD's earnings, not good. Whole industry, not good. But their margins remain overall good. And their gaming margins weren't the issue.
Yeah.
So guys, they can afford a $750 7800 XT from Navi 31. They can afford a $500 Navi 32, 16 gigabyte card for sure. And they can certainly afford a, let's be honest, 260, 7600 8 GB. And if they charge over 300, they're just trying to get like 60% margins on that thing, guys. Or more, actually. All right. But speaking of margins that did not hold up very well, let us now move on to story number 5. Intel reports Q1 2023 earnings. And quoting again from AnandTech, the blue-hued blue chip is the first out of the gate to report their earnings for the first quarter of 2023, with Intel picking up the pieces after a rough end to last year, and now with a rather painful start to 2023. For the first quarter of 2023, Intel booked $11.7 billion in revenue, a precipitous 36% drop from the year-ago quarter, which, let's remember, wasn't great. As was the case in Q4, Intel is in the midst of a major industry slump, which has hit revenues hard and operating net incomes even harder. Intel closed the quarter in the red on an operating income basis, losing $1.5 billion, and the company's overall net loss was a staggering $2.8 billion on a GAAP basis. As a result, Q1 2023 is a record-losing quarter for Intel, with the company posting its biggest loss ever recorded, even amidst the company's many ups and downs, booms and busts, and crashes in the stock market over the last 54 years. The company has never lost more than $1 billion in a quarter, let alone over $2 billion like they just did. Consequently, Intel's highly vaunted gross margin dropped to just 34.2%, its lowest in at least 20 years. And following Q1, Intel's major overall initiatives remain unchanged, though, both with regards to product plans and operational expenses. As announced last year, the company is undertaking efforts to significantly cut expenses, and according to Pat Gelsinger, Intel is well on its way towards reducing costs by $3 billion in 2023, reaching an annual savings of $8 to $10 billion by the end of 2025. Otherwise, Intel does not have any major project launches on its public roadmap for Q2 to significantly change the status. So don't be surprised if next quarter is as bad or worse. And one bright spot in terms of hardware development is that Intel's next generation Intel 4 production process and associated Meteor Lake client CPUs have entered production, with further ramping taking place throughout the year, as Intel needs to deliver on 5 nodes in 4 years, according to their own projections, or according to their own claims of what they do, to have a serious chance of retaking leadership in the fab market. This is at least a promising sign. Meteor Lake being produced now that they are on track. And then, and then I also included a link to WCCF Tech reporting that Intel plans to do another round of layoffs. And I can personally confirm Intel is nowhere near done doing layoffs. People I talked to at Intel said they're being warned by managers right now that many more rounds of layoffs are coming. I'd remind everybody, I believe a year ago, I leaked that Intel's going to lay off 10 to 20,000 people. They just confirmed 6,000 something. Yeah. That doesn't mean I was wrong. That means, guys, they're not done. And they're probably trying to hide or not really hide, but like downplay and not execute on some of the layoffs until something goes through with the CHIPS Act, actually. So, because they don't want to look bad to the U.S. government. Although I don't know how good they're going to look if the CHIPS Act and a bunch of funding from the U.S. government goes through and then they announce 10,000 firings. But, Microsoft and a bunch of people have been doing that. We'll just see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to when the government gives a corporation a bunch of money if they tied a few more strings to that funding. But
that was the airline market, not Microsoft, that I was thinking of, at least. Oh, where they got a bunch of funding and then laid people off.
Real cool airline industry. Mm-hmm. I don't know what else to say to that, but yeah, I mean, I think I looked at it at their head count, and they're reported like you said, something like 6,000 people have been laid off or there are 6,000 fewer people, employees reported versus January to now, I should say.
Mm-hmm. And again, so I don't say, well, I was wrong. I say, no, from what I'm told, like without even asking, just people telling me, hey, by the way, they're warning mid-management, more layoffs are coming. Like, no, there's more coming in. Besides that, though, Dan, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on Intel's earnings. It's funny how I kind of had more to say about AMD's earnings because there was like something interesting, like, oh, turns out their graphics cards aren't losing them money, huh, AMD? And their margins held up. With Intel, it's almost just like, hey, what do you want me to say? It's a disaster. They're losing money, layoffs. Margins are, I told everybody their margins were lower than AMD's overall. They are lower. It's just not good.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much to add. This is just a really, really bad quarter. Hopefully next quarter is slightly better. Their projections say it's slightly better than this quarter, but they're still expecting 22% loss in revenue versus last year. So not like things are going to be great.
Yeah. And it's funny, I go to some open houses for fun, and I'm looking at maybe, changing houses, trying to get a better studio for the channel within a year. And one of the people showing the house asked me what I did, told him I'm a YouTuber, and that involves Intel, AMD, and Nvidia. And I kind of do analysis, and he goes, "Oh, what do you think about Intel?" Because I own Intel stock. And I said to him, I don't see the evidence they've bottomed yet. That's kind of what Intel's claiming right now, is this is the bottom of it. I think they said on their last earnings, we think we bottomed. And I'm not seeing why they would bottom now and not in quarter two, at least when they have nothing else coming out then, and it seems to only be getting worse. I don't think they'll have bottomed until late this year, personally.
Yeah, I mean, if Raptor Lake refresh and Meteor Lake turn out to be good, maybe quarter two will be the bottom. But
well, you saw my eyes light up. Let's talk about if those products you just mentioned will turn out well with story number 6. Jessie here loves sticks, but it definitely wouldn't be healthy if I just let her chow down on them all the time, as much as she would like to. The same is usually true for reasonably priced instant meals for humans. It's easy to feel stuck looking for something that's quick to cook, tasty, healthy, and cheap all at the same time. Well, unless you consider Vite Ramen. This piece of content is sponsored by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers a ton of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy for you to add protein and other ingredients of your choice to make a complete hearty meal, or their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy, microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break, whether at the office or at home. Click on the link in the description and use the offer code BROKENSILICON to save 10% on a variety of different products, including special bundles just for Moore's Law's Dead fans, raw nudes if you want to make up your own recipes, and other food products, cooking utensils, and more. And when you order this spring, know that Vite just shut down for 3 months and relaunched their entire operation to improve speed, customer service, and just to improve things in the back end so they can keep up with how popular their product has become. Supporting them helps support me, and even just clicking on the link below makes a big difference. But I really do like their product and I recommend it. So if you're hungry for something that's healthy, cheap, and easy to make, check out Vite Ramen and use offer code BROKENSILICON today. Moore's Law's Dead drops massive leak divulging Raptor Lake refresh, Meteor Lake, Arrow Lake, and more details. Weeks ago, this channel leaked exhaustive details regarding AMD's upcoming Zen 4, Zen 5, and more products. And a few days ago, Intel's upcoming products also got their due from Moore's Law's Dead. In summary, Raptor Lake refresh launches as 14th gen to desktop and HX Extreme laptops in quarter 3 of this year, with solid boosts in single-threading and multi-threading performance and a notable efficiency increase for their mobile dies, to the point that honestly, Intel may actually be able to argue they've retaken the desktop crown right before Zen 5 launches. And in fact, the 6+8, 2+8, and I believe there may have been one other one. Then of course 8+16 mobile Raptor Lake products may actually be able to almost catch up to some of AMD's APUs in efficiency. And then next to Raptor Lake refresh will be Meteor Lake, launching to laptop in back to school season, and maybe desktop is like an i5 in the first half of next year. Meteor Lake goes up to 6 Redwood Cove big cores and 8 Crestmont little cores. According to some projected performance testing I've seen for near final silicon, Redwood Cove should offer an up to 10% higher IPC increase for Redwood Cove and maybe a 5 to 8% IPC increase for Crestmont over the Gracemont little cores in Raptor Lake, depending on how Intel decides to test for IPC in their official announcements, which again, IPC is not perfect, guys. Depending on what tests they decide to include in the roster for the average, And depending on what clock speed they run that test at, the IPC could be entirely different things. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if Intel found a way to claim they have a 12% IPC increase. Although if they were an idiot about it, they could maybe be as low as 5%. So for now, let's just assume it's like a 6 to 12% IPC increase for Redwood Cove over Raptor Cove. Additionally, they will, according to at least one source of mine, be using the Ultra moniker instead of the I moniker for branding of Meteor Lake. So Ultra 5, Ultra 7, Ultra 9 instead of i5, i7, and i9. The reason I believe they would do that is because they're going to have the same core counts as most of Mobility Raptor Lake Refresh, and they want a way to say, this is similar performance to the Raptor Lake laptop, but you get double the battery life or something. Although clock speeds are not bad, Meteor Lake should go up to 5.4 gigahertz. Its integrated graphics go up to 128 execution units of Battle Mage. That should be around 1650 Ti Max Q performance. There's the possibility of up to 512 megabytes of Adamantine L4 cache for the GPU. Technically, I can only confirm they're testing prototypes with Adamantine. I can't confirm if specific SKU will get it. And again, like I said with the Ultra thing, efficiency, Meteor Lake apparently consumes 30 to 45% less energy than Raptor Lake Refresh, not even just standard Raptor Lake at same performance level. So there's a chance you could have some Meteor Lake APUs using half the energy of Raptor Lake APUs for the same level of performance, which is really, I think, impressive.
Yeah, that seems odd to me. That just sounds like, at least for laptops at that tier of performance, it should just be Meteor Lake that they release.
But volume, capacity, and they made them anyways. And, maybe there's a chance when Meteor Lake first comes out, they have low volume. So you're going to want to be able to keep spitting out Raptor Lake. But I somewhat agree there, especially with how much oversupply of Alder Lake they apparently have. But anyways, after Meteor Lake and Raptor Lake Refresh, in late 2024, if everything goes well, hopefully, Arrow Lake should launch with up to 8 Lion Cove big cores, 16 little Skymont cores on LGA 1851, a new platform. It should bring 22 to 34% higher IPC than Redwood Cove, which would be, yes, 30 to 50% higher IPC than Raptor Cove. It, right now, in a recent test that was just conducted in the past month, 40% higher performance in both multi-threading and single-threading at same TDP with Arrow Lake 6+8 configuration, 6 big, 8 little cores versus 6+8 Meteor Lake near final silicon. So, yeah, we're looking at a massive uplift in efficiency and performance over Meteor Lake. There's a new L4 cache system, I'm told, for the Lion Cove cores. I'm told that's not Adamantine for now. And also, there could be a second generation of Adamantine using Intel 7 or their 10 nanometer node for the integrated graphics. And those integrated graphics should have 320 Celestial execution units that offer between 4050 to 4060 performance and integrated. Oh, and Sierra Glencore is a Crestmont Plus in Sierra Forest, which I know a code name. Cool. Also, though, I've heard that Crestmont Plus is only, or Sierra Glen is only 8% better than Gracemont. So that's below Ice Lake performance without hyperthreading per core. I do not understand how Intel thinks 144 not Ice Lake cores without hyperthreading will compete with 128 Zen 5 cores in server early next year. But guess that's what they got. And Granite Rapids, though, still sounds good and on schedule with Redwood Cove Plus. That should be 5 to 10% higher IPC than Redwood Cove and Meteor Lake. So it seems like Granite Rapids is ahead of schedule and performing above expectations, and Meteor Lake is underperforming. And anyways, though, that's a lot. In conclusion, this writer would summarize all of that information into Intel's competitive situation this way. Number one, Intel should be able to tread water in performance this fall if Meteor Lake and Raptor Lake R turn out well and launch on time. 2024 is going to be a very rough year competitively for Intel trying to compete with Zen 5 until Arrow Lake comes out. And number three, there does seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel, though, if Intel can execute everything well moving forward. But if Arrow Lake turns out like Meteor Lake, launching late into 2025 and below their performance estimates they're getting now, and projections and testing they're getting now, then honestly, I have to call Intel's future into question. Granite Rapids and Arrow Lake have to be killers and come out on time. And finally, a tidbit I got into in this video, it does seem like the performance of both AMD and Intel integrated GPUs are pushing OEMs to drop sub 4070 GPUs, so no more 4060 or 4050s, and a lot of upcoming laptops. And that's because they don't believe it's worth cutting your battery life in half to add an expensive GPU that maybe is only 50% better. I actually showed a chart in that leak about a Dell XPS laptop where you could see that right now a Raptor Lake Lovelace laptop might get 9 hours of battery life and mixed usage, not even gaming. They think Meteor Lake may get that to 15 to 18 hours or something. And that would allow them to advertise better than MacBook M2 battery life. Better than MacBook battery life. And they think the integrated will trade blows with the MacBook anyways. So why would we buy a graphics card that cuts our battery life in half if it's not double the performance? And that means they think only the 4070 is really worth it anymore or higher. All right. Well, so I just talked a lot. Please go on.
Yeah. So with those 320 execution unit iGPUs, that would be getting close to Strix, right?
Well,
I don't know if it would be Halo Strix, but
right.
Strix point.
I have more. Okay. So I have more specifics about Strix's performance. Like I have whole charts and documents and benchmarks with like 3D, Firestrike, Time Spy, and like all of it points to AMD wants to be around, I think, RTX 4070 laptop, 90 watt performance. So not the very pushed one, but maybe just at a typical 4070 laptop level of performance with the 120 watt APU, meaning that you're saving a ton of energy because it's both a 16 core CPU too, not an 8 core.
Oh, that's true.
And a GPU. So that's crazy. And then their low end ones, they're saying like the Max Q APUs, if you want to call them that, like the 20 watt ones with 6 cores and 20 compute units. That's what they're comparing to a 4050. My estimation of Intel's performance is between 4050 and 4060. So no, I think it's conceivable the best Arrow Lake APUs with Adamantine perform like the bottom third of Strix.
Okay.
And maybe some of the mid-level ones, but top Strix, I think, will be at least 20 to 40% stronger.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I just think at that point, AMD and Intel have kind of killed low-end GPUs and laptops then, right? I mean, hell, maybe even to mid-range GPUs and laptops, because I don't see why you would pair any CPU with a discrete graphics card when you have up to 40 compute units available, or 320 execution units. I mean, for Intel, like the lower, that might even be breaking it into like low mid-range gaming performance. There's no place for discrete graphics cards at that level of performance anymore, unless the OEMs are just slotting the new components into old designs.
Right. And speaking of slotting new components into old designs, I forgot to mention this in the write-up. Arrow Lake's base die is the same as Meteor Lake. Like, so it's not just socket compatible. It's like compatible. Like it'll be like, with Rembrandt to Rembrandt Plus, like literally your ROG laptop, throw in the new APU that's a little better, you're done.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to be. And so if you're an OEM and you're like, so if we design a grounds up design for this Meteor Lake laptop now, we know that Arrow Lake and honestly, conceivably stuff like Lunar Lake and Panther Lake will just be dropping compatible with the socket. And already the socket's making us wonder if it's worth discrete graphics. Let's put in the work and do cutting edge, thin and light designs now that shock people how thin they are for how they perform, because we'll be able to milk that chassis for years. Now's the time to do the redesign. And the same with AMD. They know a lot of the upcoming like Strix points going to be compatible with Phoenix. They know Strix Halo is going to be something that gets upgraded every year. If you're an OEM, whether it's Intel or AMD, you're doing your redesigns now. And apparently half of the laptops that had dedicated graphics before are getting axed. No more dedicated. They don't see the point.
I have to wonder if Nvidia is behind the scenes freaking out right now about laptop. I mean, it seems like they canceled they were trying to hold on to some of the like thin and lights with the MX line, which they've now axed. But
Pretty
I don't
much,
know.
yeah. And they may launch new MXs, but they're not going to be what they could have been. They're going to be for like really specific scenarios. Like, you know, they'll be like your 40, 50, 64-bit models that have 4 gigs of RAM for like bundling with like 6-core Bronze, I guess. Like that's probably where you're, or even Cezanne probably in budget netbooks. Like that's where you're going to see them, but that's not a very high volume market anymore. It used to be a high volume.
Mm-hmm.
The MX150 sold a ton of volume. I don't think it is anymore. You know, the NVIDIA people I talk to, they just go, it's just the reality of the market. We want to become an AI company. And frankly, those GPUs at the bottom never made us a lot of money. The only reason, someone told me the only reason they made the MX150 die is because, I mean, they couldn't believe Intel was actually only going to have Skylake integrated graphics until like 2019. And so they went, so wait, you're telling me for like the next 3 or 4 years, because they would have gotten this before they even launched Pascal. They would have like back in 2016 seen Intel's roadmaps and been like, oh, so wait, most of your integrated graphics are going to be terrible for like the next 5 years. All right, we'll design this micro Pascal die because even though we're maybe only selling these for $20, maybe we can sell a ton of them and the market wants it. But that's just not the case anymore. And they just seem to accept it and not really worry about it too much.
Yeah, I know. But with the Celestial, I mean, with Arrow Lake and Strix, I mean, I think it's getting to the point where that might, Intel and AMD might be challenging 50 and 60 performance with an APU, which I imagine the 50 and 60s for laptops are relatively high volume for NVIDIA.
They are, you know, and yeah, I don't know what else you want me to say about that, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting. I thought the part of the leak I enjoyed working on the most was, you know, the analysis around what these OEMs are deciding. And it was so funny. They were like, unless we can get above the linear difference in performance and battery. So if we cut our battery in half, we want at least double the graphics performance. Unless you can offer us something better than that, it's just a trade-off. You're going, do we want the knob to turn to battery life or graphics? Oh, but the graphics one also makes us design a more complicated, thicker, heavier laptop that costs more
expensive. Yeah.
Well, then we might as well just turn it to all battery and save money because we think this is enough performance. And when I reverse engineered because Jared's Tech also just did an excellent video looking at 40-watt performance of the Lovelace graphics cards. When I adjusted for that, depending on which die you're talking about, because the bigger dies lose more performance at lower TDPs, it's like 25 to a 40% performance drop to go to max Q. And then you account for the difference in battery life. Like everything pointed to, if you can get an APU stronger than a 1650, they don't want dedicated graphics cards in the mid-range or low end anymore. And it was just funny to realize, yeah, you know, maybe Meteor Lake's performance is going to be 10 to 20% better than Phoenix, but that's just at the level where they go, and we're done.
Yeah.
But besides that, did you have any other thoughts about like any disappointments, excitements about Meteor Lake or Raptor Lake refresh or something?
I mean, with those two, it doesn't seem especially, I mean, it doesn't seem like they're all that innovative. I mean, Meteor Lake power performance seems to be really good.
I think there's something that they're doing with like idle power through their base die. I'm blanking right now that I think will be pretty innovative. And I think it's worth pointing out that so Phoenix is more efficient than Raptor Lake, but as far as we can tell, it's only like 15 to 30% more efficient. So Raptor Lake refresh may only be a little less efficient than Phoenix. And Meteor Lake, therefore, should have a huge efficiency advantage over Phoenix, to the point that I wonder if it's similar efficiency to Strix, or only slightly worse. Now, look, Strix is going to have 12 big cores. Yeah. That's going to crush. It's going to have integrated performance that, as far as I can tell, is like 30 to 50% better than Meteor Lake. But it's not like it's twice as good, nor significantly more efficient. So there is something to be said that Meteor Lake, as long as it can launch 6 months before Strix, is kind of like getting Strix early.
Yeah, I mean, Meteor Lake looks like a scaled down peek into like what future products will be. but it's scaled down. So, I mean, one, you're going to get really good performance per watt, which will be great for smaller laptops. So it's kind of like a repeat of Tiger Lake in a lot of ways, then it seems. But you're not getting really new levels of performance. You're just getting really good efficiency. And, that will speak to, like you said, what like Strix and what Arrow Lake will look like, which is iterating on Meteor Lake.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, all I can then say is it has to come out for back to school. It was going to slip to Q4, but Pat said, well, how much money do you need? That just can't happen. I mean,
yeah,
like if this launches next to Strix, don't forget this, guys. Meteor Lake uses Intel 4, I think TSMC 6 nanometer and a bunch of different nodes, and it's 3D stacked. Strix is a monolithic 210 millimeter squared APU that might beat Meteor Lake at everything.
Mm-hmm.
If it is, it has to, like, again, these are the levers you pull. You launch first. Okay, well, so if you're like not better, then you have to launch first to market, and that's why Meteor Lake has to, because otherwise it's just a more expensive Strix that's a little worse.
If Intel doesn't execute on all of these when you're currently in this video saying they plan on doing it, then they're screwed, right? Like
exactly,
because I think it's a good way to put it is Raptor Lake refresh and Meteor Lake tread water. I mean, so like that might even arguably be better than what AMD has right now, which is good. And, for new products, that means OEMs should probably go with Intel when they're designing laptops for a little bit. But that's really all you can say. That's not a huge deal having a product that's slightly better than your competitors 8 months later or 6 months later or something.
Mm-hmm.
And if they these fall behind what they've been talking about, which Intel has a habit of doing lately, then you're just at a point where they're releasing worse things at the same time as their competitor. So, yeah, Meteor Lake and Raptor Lake refresh need to come out later this year. Arrow Lake
and hit those things they're supposed to be able to achieve because they're already, well, maybe not Raptor Lake, but Meteor Lake's already performing a little worse than they projected it would. They I'm telling you guys, their goal is a 15% IPC increase. And if they only get around 10%, okay, and a year late.
Yeah, and then if Arrow Lake and Granite Rapids deliver on time, it looks like they might actually be on par with AMD at the same time.
Or better. I mean, Arrow Lake, I could see it beating Zen 5 by a solid 10% in IPC. You never know.
And if they do that, then I don't think they're treading water anymore if they release it around the same time as AMD.
Right. And the one last thing I'd want to say is, I think Raptor Lake refresh has turned out better than Intel expected. I think, but it's only really treading water if it's the upper ends of what I'm told it's going to be. That is over 10% multi-threading performance increase, hopefully at least 6.3, 6.4 gigahertz boost clocks. If it's only 6.2 and it's like a 5% multi-threading increase, I don't really see how that moves the needle almost at all. But if it gets to double-digit performance increases at same power, I think that's enough that Raptor Lake can claim they've got the desktop crown again, surprisingly. But also remember, it costs more to make than Zen 4. So I think what you're going to see this fall, guys, I mean, especially with how sales are going, I checked today and a lot of the X3D parts are already in stock. There's been a couple sales too on a couple websites here and there. I think AMD is going to have, if they need to, $350 7800X 3Ds, below $200 7600s. They're going to have $500 16 cores, maybe below $600 16 cores with Vcache. If AMD does that, yeah, Intel, this is treading water, not because Intel might not retake the crown, but if Intel is selling you a $650 14900K, that's marginally better than a $500 16 core that uses half the energy. You'd hope it's at least 30% better for 30% more or something. You wouldn't be excited about that.
Go on. The one last thing, this isn't really, it's tangentially related to this leak. It is the change of the eye branding for Meteor Lake.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I don't know. What do you think? Like, Do you think Intel thinks they've killed their, like, as far as like a positive like consumer association? Do you think they think they've killed the I brand completely and they just need to get rid of it? Or
I can't claim to know a ton about this. I saw it on on video cards a couple weeks ago or something, before I even put the leak out, something about Ultra. It's not something I looked into that much. But one of my contacts said Intel reps are saying Ultra for Meteor Lake a lot.
no, I just saw this. The head of one of the PR heads at Intel said that, confirmed it in a tweet that they're
today or something?
a week ago.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. I didn't even know that.
I'm just thinking, like,
I guess people didn't know if they would use Ultra for everything, but I guess I confirmed it seems to just be for Meteor Lake.
Okay.
As a distinguishing factor to Raptor Lake.
It's not clear in that tweet, which I'll send to you, if they're just doing it as a change for Meteor Lake or if they think that they've killed the good
they
brand.
Need to kill.
Or
that they need to.
That they've killed the reputation of the I branding, so they need to change it to something new after a few years of this. It's just kind of crazy to me to think that they are actually changing that, because
that's an interesting thought though, Dan, because Arrow Lake I think could finally take the crowns. There'd be people that go Raptor Lake did, and I'd say no, it didn't. Raptor Lake didn't take any freaking crowns, really. It got a 1% win in gaming while using double the energy. Yay! What a technological achievement. I mean, come on, guys. But Arrow Lake, I think, might use the same energy or less than, well, I guess let's not say that because I don't even know what they'll do with energy overall. But I could see Arrow Lake laptop chips being way more efficient than Zen 5 and Arrow Lake desktop chips taking the performance crown by 20%. That's a win. And calling that Ultra, that'd be the right time to do it. To kill the I brand when you're ahead again. And maybe they just feel they need to do that now with Meteor Lake early because it will probably beat Phoenix at absolutely everything. Let's be honest. It costs more and it's a year late. And should we really brag about a 3D stacked elaborate chip beating a 170 millimeter squared APU? I don't know. But Intel can claim they've got wins. Maybe that is just they're killing the I brand. I thought of it just from the context of distinguishing between them, but I guess you could argue if they continue to succeed, this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
Although, I guess another thing I thought of, I do have to say this, guys. AMD hasn't launched Vcache APUs yet, and I know they have Vcache Dragon Range. So Meteor Lake may win gaming against Phoenix, but what happens when AMD launches a Vcache 16 and 8 cores? I don't think they'll win gaming anymore. And, and their APU will be better than Phoenix, but it's going to cost more. So I don't know. I would just point that out that it's still not like AMD doesn't have options even this year. They can launch Vcache models that just roundhouse kick Meteor Lake and performance at same power. And then next year they'll have Fire Range Vcache Zen 5 that at least in laptop I think will probably tie Arrow Lake. So Intel's not out of the woods yet. It's just the start of things looking better, I think, late next year. And even this year, AMD's got options. I don't know what Everman writes in. Hola, Tommy and Danny. Tommy, what do your AMD contacts think, or what's their gut feelings about Intel's Adamantine? I'm surprised that Intel seemingly is getting such large cache numbers compared to AMD's now paltry 64 megabytes, or is it more nuanced than that? Nothing. AMD and Nvidia people I talked to before I leaked Adamantine details said they'd never heard of it. And to this day, they don't tell me they have anything to say. I think they want to see how they're doing it and what it is before they say anything, because, when you see capacities that large, there are a lot of people at these companies that say things like, well, what is it? Just fast SRAM? I mean, is it really cache? And from what I've heard is from people at Intel is that they have a very, very novel way to give you almost infinity cache performance with quadruple the capacity or something. And I think the opinion of AMD is, let's see it, and then I'll believe it, and then I'll comment on it. But until they know how much it costs, is this just brute force? Until they know if it actually performs even remotely close to infinity cache, they don't really have anything to say. Bfish36 writes in and asks, I've been thinking about Strix's Halo leak, and it got me thinking about something else. Assuming it launches and is spec'd, as you say, and Intel can get Air Lake running with an ARC graphics tile that competes somewhat, could this squeeze NVIDIA out of the laptop market? Yeah.
I think I accidentally brought this up.
Yeah, before we got to this reader mail. So, yeah, no, I think, look, NVIDIA's going to be in high-end everything for a long time in gaming, but they're going to start getting squeezed out of markets. And it's funny that this seems shocking when, didn't we already say this was probably going to happen for years, though?
I feel like people have been fantasizing about a Strix-like APU for like a decade now. So,
yeah. Steno764 writes in, Hi, Tom and Dan. Do you guys think that AMD's Strix Halo will ever be made as a desktop APU next to their laptop lineup, or would a move like that not make sense for AMD? Well, it won't fit on AM5, and you'd be surprised at how many people in the comments have then said, well, so will they launch a new socket for Strix Halo on desktop?
I think.
Why would you? I don't think so.
I think the scenario where you would get it on desktop is if some company like releases a soldered motherboard thing that you can slot into a desktop or something like that.
Oh, and I have no doubt that there will be Strix NUCs that are desktop chips.
Yeah.
With a motherboard with a soldered on chip. Yeah, I think you're going to look at that for sure. 100% that will exist. Mini's forum will have one, I'm sure. Hopefully I'll get to test it. In terms of a socket, it would have to use Threadripper, and I just don't see the point of launching that. I don't know.
Or it would just need its own unique socket, right? Or would it fit? I guess I don't know if you
maybe it could fit in a Sienna socket, so maybe it could fit in a budget Threadripper board. And I guess you might argue, oh, well, you get, because Threadripper is 256-bit. So I'll say this, it's conceivable. It could go into the budget Threadripper line that might use Sienna. But I don't know why that would be a priority to launch, unless you had a limited amount of yields that use double the energy, aren't good enough for laptop, and you're like, I don't know, we're just launching this to see if people want this. Mm-hmm. Because remember, it would be very cool if there was a $400 Strix APU that you could throw in your AM5 system and game like the performance of an RX 7800 non-XT or something. Well, that wouldn't even be that. It'd be like an RX 7700 non-XT. If you could, or actually be weaker than that. So, if you could game in between Navi 33 and Navi 32 for $400 with a 16 core included, that'd be cool. But I don't know why AMD would be selling you 16 cores with graphics for less than they're going to sell the 16 core.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if they put Strix Halo on a desktop, they could
$800, right? I mean,
I was gonna say they could sell for $800-900 probably.
Right, and so that makes it a Threadripper chip, and then you go, okay, well, that might still be cool for some people if they want to make the ultimate small form factor build. Then it's like, yeah, but so if it has to use a Threadripper motherboard, are they excited to buy a $500 motherboard to do this? I don't think it makes sense, guys. This is purpose built for laptop and for NUCs. There will be NUCs with it soldered on, but in terms of putting it in a socket you buy on Newegg, I don't see it. Keekum writes in, Hi, Tom. Long-time viewer, first-time writing in. Do you think there is potential for AMD to fall into competitionless complacency like Intel did during the Ivy Bridge era, through KB Lake era, where gen over gen performance increases were lackluster to almost nothing? This has been a wonder and a worry of mine for a while now, that AMD is a true contender in all markets again, while Intel keeps downsizing and doesn't bring products to market. Why wouldn't AMD do this? Well, because they don't want it to ever happen again, nor happen to them what's happening to Intel right now. And
I think there's a pretty inherent difference between where we're at right now and where AMD and Intel were at a decade ago to 5 years ago, where AMD basically didn't launch a desktop CPU for like 5 years.
Yeah, it was terrible.
It's
3 or 4, but
you're right. Yeah, but like Intel was so far ahead of AMD that the comparison is a bit off. Like AMD's definitely ahead of Intel right now, but they're not the same degree of distance that we have right now, where It feels like Intel is like half a step behind AMD to a full step behind AMD at all times. Where now, back then, AMD was like 3 steps behind Intel.
Yeah, I mean, and at the end of the day, like anyone who complains about AMD getting complacent, just remember they're nowhere near to the level of complacency that Intel did. Like people are complaining about 16 core stagnation while AMD gives you 30% performance increases still every generation with new features. That's not complacency. And everyone I talk to at AMD, Zen 6 is ambitious. Zen 5 supposedly a bigger deal than Zen 4. All evidence is that AMD has no plans to slow down for like the next 3 or 4 years. So and, you know, frankly, the final thing I'd say about this question is, you know, they're not just competing with Intel. Right now, in a lot of their server roadmaps, AMD is comparing their Bergamo products to Apple's upcoming server products and ARM and Graviton and all this other stuff and NVIDIA's Grace. Like, Intel could disappear and AMD needs to innovate to keep competing with like a dozen other companies. So, no, there's no complacency here whatsoever. Before we even talk about Intel, there can't be, and there's no evidence on the roadmaps there will be. Also, I just sent you a picture of what Jessie looks like right now while we've been talking. I think I will want to put that on screen because she's not always in the background, but this goddamn Belgian Malinois coonhound dog here will not leave my side, and that's usually what, if you don't see Jessie, guys, that picture on screen is usually what's at my feet.
Dogs.
But let us not get lazy like Jessie here and move on to story number 7. Rumors emerge of Blackwell getting delayed by 3 nanometer issues, but Daniel Nenny and a couple sources of mine think otherwise. So I don't have a big write-up here, but I did want to address the rumors from DigiTimes that NVIDIA was delaying Blackwell due to TSMC 3 nanometer issues. Just had Daniel Nenny on the podcast. He says that's bullshit. That, you know, basically, as far as he can tell, and he was just at like a symposium of TSMC's, it seems like by his calculations, 3 nanometer is full stop 6 months behind. But Blackwell isn't supposed to launch this year. It's launching late 2024. NVIDIA planned Blackwell to use 3 nanometer, kind of accounting for if there could be delays in the node. So there's no evidence 3 nanometer won't be ready by then. Daniel said by the end of this year, 3 nanometer yields should be better than 4 nanometer yields. It's just it's 6 months behind. And another source I talked to pointed out, hey, remember how we've been talking about how NVIDIA has 1 or 2 years of oversupply? You know, since my NVIDIA Ampere oversupply leak, I've been saying NVIDIA made 1 to 2 years too much of Ampere. And then we know from public information that NVIDIA's ordered more Lovelace than they did Ampere. Now, they may cut orders, but they still probably made way too many already. Guys, they have 1 to 2 years still of product they need to get rid of. If they delay Blackwell, it's probably because they have too much stuff to sell, right?
Yeah, they'll survive.
And they think they'll survive. They think, you know, AMD could launch early, they'll be okay. And even if it's a hit, there's always businesses making decisions in an imperfect world. And they're like, we'll give AMD a head start if it means we don't have to throw away 50 million graphics cards or something. I'm not saying that's how much it is, but I think it's over 10 million still or something. So yeah, that's how much they have. And then also keep in mind that OEMs are designing their low-end products out this year, maybe a generation sooner than NVIDIA expected, although they expected it eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And what are they going to do with all those graphics cards? So if Blackwell's being delayed, I don't think it's because of TSMC 3 nanometer. All right, let me move on to a reader mail from Grand Demand, who writes in and says, any new rumblings about Titan ADA? I would love to not spend $6,800 for a 48 gigabyte graphics card that gets reviewed. Nope, nothing to say.
Guess I'll spend $6,800.
I think it would probably be 48 gigabytes and be 3,000. That's my guess. But yeah, I mean, it kind of would have to be. I think I've heard they're selling in bulk RTX 6000s if you buy multiple of them for like $3,000. So I imagine a 48 gigabyte Titan, which is just a 6000 card that needs more voltage. They probably want to sell it for the same price though with that crazy cooler. It is so funny though. Nvidia's almost managed to push the price of their gaming cards to the price of their Quadro cards.
Well, at that point, it's just start marketing Quadros to gamers or something, you know?
Or selling them directly to miners. QH Freddy writes in and says, do you think Nvidia skimping on VRAM is motivated by planned obsolescence or by them wanting to avoid GeForce cards cannibalizing Quadro sales? Both, and they want to save space.
Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, I don't think the planned obsolescence thing is going to work anymore because AMD's mostly caught up to them, and I think they're calling them on their BS by, giving cards more RAM.
Well, yeah. And I do want to say this about the, planned obsolescence thing I see people throw around in the comments all the time. I think there's a certain degree of Nvidia going, oh, if they have to upgrade sooner, sounds good. But I don't think they're going, we have to make sure this doesn't work in 3 years.
Yeah.
That is not, no one at Nvidia is doing that, guys. And they're just going, what's the minimum we need to win all the benchmarks when this comes out? And if it happens to age worse, we don't really care as long as it's good for a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're doing. But they're not like literally planning obsolescence, I don't think. Maverick writes in, do you think, again, this guy from Top Gun, do you think that with all the discussions around VRAM, Nvidia will launch super variants of Lovelace with more VRAM to make them more competitive and optically better buys? I think it would make more sense to just launch an RTX 5000 series that's Lovelace 2.0.
I think you get a super series if they think they could. I think the super series, the stuff and all of the variants you got out of Ampere.
Oh, Turing.
Yeah.
Super was Turing.
Sorry. Turing and then all of the other variants you got out of Ampere. I think you got those because they thought that they could squeeze slightly more money by slightly changing like the gates they have on their binning process. And I think you'll get supers or TIs or whatever if they think that they can do that again. But I don't know. This is a lower demand cycle, so I don't think there's as much of a pressure on them to, put out a million different variants so they can squeeze slightly more money out of them because nobody wants them anyways. So I don't think people are going to want to buy a $850 4070 Super when they don't want to buy an $800 4070.
Well, yeah, and I think it's far more likely if they needed double VRAM and respond to a market that isn't buying their stuff. I think it's far more likely they do an RTX 5000 series because I think it would be just so silly to go with Super and all of this other stuff. Like Lovelace is selling terrible compared to their previous gens, relatively speaking. And if it's selling terribly, so you have brand damage, and then you also need to make major adjustments to the lineup, I think it's pretty obvious that what Nvidia would do is launch an RTX 5090 that's the full die with faster memory and 48 gigabytes, which let's remember, that would be a new flagship that's probably 20% better than the current one with double the RAM. That's enough to call it a new series, I think. And you could just call that the RTX 5090, charge $2,000. You could then launch a 5080. That's the full die with 32 gigabytes or something crazy for $1,200. And you could just go down the stack, get everything more RAM and better yields. And I think they could have a 20% boost with double the RAM across the board. And, they could launch that before RDNA 4 is ready. And I think that's a way smarter move than trying to do some super thingy. And also, though, I will say one person did point this out to me behind the scenes. If we doubled the RAM of everything, though, that would increase the cost of RAM possibly if both us and AMD did that. So I still just think it's likely they try to make do this generation.
Yeah. I mean, the one reason I think that they might just go super instead of calling it a new generation is I don't know if I'm just misreading what they're doing, but it seems like Nvidia is more opposed to rebadge generations than they used to be. And they would prefer to just keep, if it's the same architecture or same dies, call it the same lineup and just add a new modifier to the name, like Super TI or gigabyte quantities, whatever they feel like doing with the given model.
Yeah, and I don't think Super is really necessary this time. I'm told by multiple people, including some reviewers that I talked to behind the scenes, that the Super thing with Turing, that was insanely last minute. Like, that came out of nowhere. I don't think they liked the Super naming. They just needed something that would work and wasn't TI because they're going to launch Supers next to TIs. I don't think it's necessary. I think if they do new VRAM models, you can just have 4080 Ti. You can have 40, I guess I don't know what they do with the 4070, but they could just launch it. It's already the full die. They could just launch a 24 gigabyte 4070. They could launch, whatever. I don't think they need Supers this gen.
Yeah.
QH Freddy writes in, do you think Nvidia might completely leave the consumer gaming graphics card space at some point? Do you think they are doing so already? And dedicated GPU sales appear to have been on a slow decline year on year for over a decade, and Nvidia has a strong presence in the far more lucrative professional market already. Obviously, over the years, GPU shipments have shifted to higher ASP cards, like the ultra low end has disappeared, and the growth in professional and data center appears to be far faster. What's stopping them from throwing in the towel on low margin consumer products already? Competition, but they want to. I mean, guys, there's no way around it. I think this VRAM thing and AMD's aggressiveness has thrown a wrench in their plans. I think they wanted the 4070 to be 700 at least. They wanted the 4060 Ti to be 500 something. They wanted the 4060 to be 400. They did, but now they won't. And this doesn't change their overall goal of doing that eventually. I don't think they plan to leave the dedicated space though for a decade.
I mean, yeah. Who knows how, like 10 years from now, maybe they'll make the decision to just be a completely AI company or something. But
even then, I think they'd still make a 103 and a 104 and a 106 die. Less dies. Maybe they wouldn't make a 90. Maybe they wouldn't make low end, but I think they'd still make that mid-range to high end.
I think the gaming market still serves an important part of their business model where, they give us the dies that they can't give to Quadro.
Yeah. All right. That is all of the stories and the questions for those. Let us now get to the wrap up. These are the final stories that we go through that we don't think deserve their own full conversation, but we do think are worth mentioning. All right. So, Dan, the Microsoft Activision deal was blocked. That could have gotten its own story if it wasn't a high news cycle, actually. But what do you think about it?
Not super surprising, but I think that was obviously the big thing we all talked about when it first happened. But I mean, I think it's good that it's got blocked by some regulatory body.
Yeah, I think there's no way around it, especially with how Redfall is turning out, which I know we had some friends, and I was to a certain degree too, excited for that game as a new co-op game to play. It just seems like that's falling short of what people wanted, and everything coming out of Microsoft Studios right now, if not everything, most things, are just not what we expected. And wanting Microsoft to own more studios, I don't see how that will get us more games. And Game Pass continues to be a money loss for them. I know some people argue it is a loss. Read between the lines, guys. They always put a bow on top of it, but it's not making the money they wanted to. They've said that in multiple earnings calls. And I don't know what people want. Like, why do you want them to run more studios into the ground? Well, making it so less people can play games, and centralizing control of studios doesn't help anyone. I don't want Sony to own everyone. I don't want Microsoft to own anyone. I don't want Tencent to own everyone. I think this could only hurt gaming. And every time something like this happens, it's more likely this is just going to fall apart. And at this point, I think it's easily over 50%. This deal isn't going to go through.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like, I think you can just look at what's been going on lately with Bethesda since its acquisition by Microsoft, and things aren't going super well at Bethesda Studios right now. I mean, I don't think you can just lay all of that blame at Microsoft, obviously, but Bethesda Studios is completely behind on like all of their games. Arcane just released Redfall to terrible reviews. I don't know. It just does not seem like that acquisition is helping the market right now. So,
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not surprised it's blocked, and there's no argument I can see for why this would be good for gaming. Maybe good for a Microsoft shareholder, but I'm not a shareholder, so why would I want it? Also, Microsoft partnering with AMD on AI chips. I don't see too much detail here, just that it seems like Microsoft is helping AMD with their like MI products and maybe with some semi-custom versions of them because they realize
because every company has realized that they should be an AI now.
Yeah, and they realized Nvidia has a huge head start and they want something special for them. So, yeah, that's interesting to see Microsoft and AMD work together, though. Microsoft has the money and the use, and AMD can make it. So, makes sense to me. I guess MSI, this is another story here, just unlaunched the Super 3060 Ti, which I just think is hilarious. I don't have really anything to say about this. I just think it's funny that MSI decided to call a 3060 Ti a super, and Nvidia said, no, you can't call it super. That's a brand we might use eventually for again.
OEMs are really bold sometimes.
They are. And then another story here. AMD. Well, so a few things actually involving AMD stuff. Phoenix 2 has finally been confirmed by AMD in some new ROCm releases. At least they put something called Phoenix 2 in ROCm. Who knows? And this is the thing that I leaked as Little Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And then there was a leak online that had different specs than what I said, but then I was told those are the correct specs, so that's out there. This is what was it? I believe it was 2 big core, 4 Zen 4 C core, budget version of Phoenix that's supposed to come out at the end of this year that AMD still hasn't revealed. But finally, we have something out of AMD kind of making it sound like this thing's really happening. In addition to that, and more APU news, we have the Z1 and the Z1 Extreme gaming console APUs. They're just different bins of Phoenix. I mean, I don't know that the ROG Ally is going to use it, the handheld gaming device.
So, I mean, yeah, it's just branding Phoenix for Steam Deck competitors, seemingly.
I have to admit, I am laughing at the 8.6 teraflop Z1 and then the much weaker, crazy cut down AMD Ryzen Z1 2.8 teraflop graphics card APU, and then the Switch 0.4. Lateral thinking from Nintendo.
It is lateral, Tom.
It is. I think should just be called downward thinking because you're always below the competition for the price. And then AMD actually finally confirmed specs of some Phoenix APUs. I don't know if you saw that, Dan. I haven't really covered it, but AMD was like changing the specs on their website every now and then for boost clocks and stuff. Like they still to the last minute didn't really know what it was going to be.
Which definitely helps with the branding that people are already confused by with the 7000 series for APUs.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything really big here to say about Phoenix. I'm hoping to have Tim on from Hardware Unboxed to talk about all of the mobility stuff soon. So we'll just hope there's finally some comprehensive Phoenix reviews. I know there's been some handheld ones, but I want to see like multiple of them to kind of do a summary finally and talk about it with Tim. 4060 Ti die is pictured. Don't have much to say about this. It's just a bin of 8106. And tons of RDNA 3 names were leaked, also in ROCm. So like 7950 XTX, 7950 XT, seems odd to me, 7800 XT, and like all of these other things, 7600M, 7500 XT. I don't have much to say about this. I have no doubt, like, for example, a 7600 XT could exist. I have no doubt that there could be a 7950 XTX. But when I see 7950 XT, there's 2 above the 7900 XTX. I don't know. Maybe this is like there's 2 bins of the double infinity cache variant, or maybe they've fixed RDNA 3 with a new die, and that's why there's going to be a 950 XT and 950 XTX. I don't know, but I can't help but mention, guys, a lot of these could be products that never come out, and AMD knows leakers look at their driver releases, and this could be just to mess with people.
I mean, I would assume that there are a million potential GPU names that there are out there that like somehow end up in their software somewhere. And that's what this is. Because I don't know, maybe release 3 names above the 7900 XTX to really get people talking about nothing.
Right. And I'm told by people at AMD, they intentionally put specs that were wrong for RDNA 2 intentionally in drivers.
I'm sure.
They knew, and it's like, guys, AMD knows people tweet out stuff in their drivers. They would be dumb to not do misdirection. So I have nothing bad, negative, real, or unreal to say about this. It's just there's names, could be fake. I see no more evidence this is real than if they wouldn't have said it, honestly. All right, let us now move on to the final reader mails. The Forbidden Juice writes in and says, would you wager 32 gigabytes of GDDR6 that AMD will increase VRAM amounts by around 50% per tier for RDNA 4? So would I bet that AMD is going to go to like 32 to 36 gigabytes of RAM or something for RDNA 4? No, I think 24 is enough. I think they could, I could see 48 gigabytes, sure, but I don't. If I were AMD, I'd try to keep the cost at $1,000 and keep 24 gigabytes. I don't think we need 48 gigabytes of RAM yet. Maybe for like some S tier special flagship if they think they're going to take the crown, sure. But otherwise, I don't think every tier needs more RAM. We just need the low end to get over 12 gigabytes and the mid range to get 16 or more. We don't need 80 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, I think the top end is fine at 24 gigabytes for now at least. And it would be good if the tiers below it were all 12 or 16 gigabytes or something, or 20 gigabytes.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is for me to consider it crazy, 24 gigabytes isn't crazy. We've had 24 gigabytes since Turing for the Titan RTX. So we're talking, what are we, like 5 years already of 24 gigabyte flagships. For me to go, wow, it needs to be at least 32 at this point. And frankly, it's been 5 years, guys. 48 gigabytes is the new 24. I'm not saying the 4090 needs more RAM. I am saying I'm not wowed by 24 anymore. There's many games that use that much already. And I guess the only go on.
24 gigabytes of RAM isn't some fascinating number at this point. I would just, if you made me pick increasing the amount of RAM at the low end or the high end, I would pick increasing it at the low end because I think 24 gigabytes is going to be sufficient for a long time.
Right. And, it's funny. This is a conversation I had with a couple of graphics card engineers. And I was like, when people we're like, I don't know, 8 gigabytes, we might need to keep doing it. I said, I know you guys are complaining about cost and like whatever, but we're not asking for the moon here. We don't even need more RAM, arguably, at $500. We have 16 gigabytes now. All we're asking is that the low end also gets 16. We're not asking for a whole lot, And so with RDNA 4, if they brought at least a 50% performance increase, I would just say their top card should probably try to get 32 or 48. But then the cut down variant should just have 24 again, and the mid range should have 16 to 24, and the low end should have 12 to 16. That'd be fine. Carmen Cry writes in, Tom, would you bet a pack of raw nudes, insert Vite Ramen sponsorship here, remember use Broken Silicon for 10% off, everybody, that if Intel still had quad-core i7s, like Nvidia has high-end 8 gigabyte cards still, people would complain that modern games are badly optimized because those quad cores are no longer enough to get high-end performance? I thought this was a funny reader mail because you see people complaining about 8 gigabytes of RAM in their 3070 that the games are unoptimized. And yet we've had 8 gigabyte cards for less than $300 since 2016, maybe 2015 with discount 390s. So I actually think that's a good comparison. It'd be like if AMD didn't have Zen and we still were using quad cores in the high end. And then people were like, it's been 20 years of quad cores. Why does this game sometimes need more than that?
Yeah, it's been such a weird thing to see where it's like, how many more teraflops does the 3070 have than the AMD's 390? Like, We expect.
I
so
don't
much,
remember off the top of my head, but I think the 390 was around 3 to 4 teraflops, and the 3070 is like 23.
Like, yeah, so we expect that much more compute out of a card, but no more RAM.
Yeah, or 3 to 5 teraflop. 3 to 6 teraflops. I don't remember exactly.
5 teraflops.
Okay.
It's just hilarious. We expect everything to get better. People want games to look better infinitely, but for some reason, 8 gigabytes of RAM is the cutoff. We will never go over that. 8 gigabytes of RAM in a game. I don't know.
It'd be like making that
expecting.
argument for quad cores.
Yeah.
Sarcastro writes in and he says, Tom, I went back and re-listened to episode 1 of Broken Silicon, not Phantom Menace, but Broken Silicon again. And I think it's a great that you kept it on record in the cavernous library that is the Broken Silicon records. And Dan got some studio time in a I see. Let me back up. He says, I think it's great that you recorded in a cavernous library while Dan recorded in a shoebox. The grainy audio made for a true hi-fi stereo system experience. I definitely would recommend it as a worthy trip to somebody with $5,000 speakers. I'm very glad you moved on, though, from that level of audio performance. Gerard is a good editor. Hashtag audiophile. Yeah, I mean, it was a couple of years ago that I re-listened to the first episode, and I thought the episode was better than expected. The predictions technically in the first one were almost all came true. And
what do you know?
We did kind of sound like we were in a library with a shoebox on our heads.
Well, hey, what do you expect? That was the quality we were aiming for, Tom. We just wanted people to have an authentic experience with my $15 microphone.
To be fair, Sarcastro, when I started Broken Silicon, that was 1 year before I did this full time, and I think I made $100 a month off the channel. So we couldn't really afford much more than that then. And in addition to us being just notably worse at making the content. But yeah, I thought that was funny. The Forbidden Juice writes in, Tom, I think it is time for us to check in with how you and the team are doing. Do you feel you have reached a point where you are satisfied with the funds you receive versus the amount of work you do? Yes. Has the channel success continued at or beyond what you sought to achieve? No. Lastly, what do you think was the tipping point that got you to this point now? Thanks for your hard work, and I hope for continued success. Yeah, so I think, well, Dan, you speak for yourself. I think, I pay you and Gerard. You're paid enough where it doesn't feel like your time is charity.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like we're getting rich off of this, but it's not we are happy.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that the second question, do you think we're beyond what I initially thought I would be happy to achieve? Yes. Are we beyond what I want to achieve? No.
Yeah.
Like, we're already getting to a point where I've been told upper management at Intel and AMD and Nvidia every now and then is shown a brief slide from one of our leaks and is like, hey, so somehow they know this, or look at how people in the comments are responding to this leak. I don't think we can charge this much. Like, I'm already told that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't ever expect to get like as big as someone like Gamers Nexus, but if I'm being honest, guys, I wish we could hire a couple of full-time employees, pay Gerard to have this basically be a full-time job, and get to a point where we're like a big channel that isn't as big as, Gamers Nexus or something, but is big enough that if we have a big thing, they can't ignore us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Guys, I've never been sent a graphics card for review. Everything comes out of pocket. I think we make enough that I can afford to do that when I want to. And contributors also send me stuff when it's hard to get. That's really nice of them as well. But imagine if we could get products a week before launch because they can't ignore us. Imagine if we could say whatever we want and they'd still have to send us stuff for review because we're too big to be ignored. And imagine if we found an issue that people couldn't ignore. Like, I just think we could have a bigger effect on this space. And I already think we're having a positive effect on it. And that's really what my long-term goal is. Whereas if we reach that, I wouldn't know what to do next. I don't know what you think. what you, I know we're already, though, you would agree, right, Dan, past the minimum of what we were hoping to achieve by far.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I don't know as far as the channel goes. I mean, I don't think it's the type of content that will ever get as big or require as much money as like Gamers Nexus, who does in-depth testing of products, like partners with labs to actually do like electron microscopy sometimes. So I don't think it's ever going to get to that scale, and I don't think you or I have the technical know-how or the desire to get that technical know-how to be able to do that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, getting bigger so to a point where like you're actually consistently getting products would obviously what broaden your impact.
Well, and imagine if, like, because right now I think we're almost to 160,000 subscribers, which, yes, I think me and you were like, oh, it'd be crazy if we got to 100. What if we got to 500,000? And I don't think that's something I've planned or think we'll achieve anytime soon. But like, what if we got to a point where we had like 4,000 patrons, 500,000 YouTube subscribers, and when I get a leak on information or I hear there's an issue, because there have been issues I just haven't had time to cover, we had someone we had hired full time, and I could say, test this. And we could just know for a leak if that's already true or if something else is true. Or we hear about a new feature in a CPU and we're like, check that voltage like that and see if it actually performs that way. Our videos could have a level of quality and testing that we haven't even fathomed, Yeah,
that's true.
If we had people, it would be hard to find the person, but if we could have someone who could edit the videos for me entirely, someone who could be a researcher full time. Imagine, like, so much. You've seen how many links are in my leaks. Imagine if I could get information, had someone full time to fact check it based on publicly available knowledge announced by these companies and reference it relative. Oh, and in this earnings, they said this. And then I also had the ability to put it all together and someone else edit. We could probably put out an exclusive video every week. We could have videos come out without ads. We had that many patrons. I mean, so I still think there's a lot more we can grow, is what I'm saying, which we can't do unless you support us on Patreon and other places as well. But the last thing I want to say to this, I think was a fun question to end on, was what was the tipping point? I thought about it like, I don't think there's any like one tipping point, right? Like there's always been every few months a video that does well where we're like, yay. And we've always been gaining subscribers every month.
Yeah.
There's not one tipping point. There's probably 5 I could point to that were big moments for the channel, but there's not only one. What I can say is, and I thought this was a fun thing to write down, is I do remember when I decided to start taking this seriously, I was on a business trip around Appleton or Oshkosh, Wisconsin, I believe. And of course, I was based in Peoria at the time in late 2019. And I was driving back through Wisconsin, and I was thinking this whole time, these cameras cost thousands, these mics cost hundreds, I'd have to buy the software. At the time, I was making nothing. I mean, hundreds a month, maybe. So it certainly wouldn't have been worth the money to buy a $1,000 camera, and nor my time I was an account manager to try to get the audio working at a higher quality. And at the time I was doing a different podcast and project called Flyover States, where I used a lot of pictures I took, and I saw the clouds open up and the sun it looked like something out of a cartoon, how beautiful, and perfect it was. Like the sun roll over like rolling farm hills. And I was like, God, I wish I could take a high quality picture of that right now.
Yeah.
Oh, I could. And then I realized, you know what? Even if it might end up like I've wasted thousands of dollars, I can spend thousands right now and get the same mics and equipment the bigger channels have. And that will help. And I should just start taking this more seriously. And so on that drive back from a business trip is when I went, I won't live with myself if I don't try to take this seriously. And I just do low quality content into a camera every day, every week as a side gig.
Drinking wine and wearing sunglasses.
We have covered what my original video was going to be, and I am so happy it never came out. But you'll have to scour our content to find that. But we have shown it, I believe, in actually one of the I think the Christmas episode of Broken Silicon in 2019.
I know you've shown parts of it before.
I think Christmas episode with you, Dan, one of the Christmas episodes in 2019.
That sounds
I showed
right.
clips of me wearing sunglasses, drinking a glass of wine, wearing a Batman pajama top.
Well, the
First time I
Batman
saw it.
pajama top just accentuates what you're trying to do.
Which was look like a douchebag. So if you want, I just thought I had to have a gimmick. Like I'll be the guy who drinks while he talks about CPUs with sunglasses on. I'm sorry, just say it out loud. I'm sure I'm blushing. It's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever seen myself do.
That would have been awesome if it took off like that, though. And
then I had to be drunk and wear sunglasses.
Yeah.
This would have been a much less analytical channel if that's what we did.
Yes.
But I'm glad that is not what happened. And I just slowly discovered, hey, if I try hard, I don't need a gimmick. It can just be good content. But that is, I think, the tipping point in late 2019 on a business trip when I realized I can do it. I think we can do it. Maybe it's only a 50-50 shot. It's a better shot than most people. I'm going to spend the money and we're going to take this seriously. So there you go. Couldn't have done this, of course, without all of you supporters. If you do want to support the channel, make sure you subscribe to Moore's Law Z on the YouTube channel. Hit the bell button, hit the like button on every video you watch. Make sure you don't miss that upcoming content. Tell your friends about us. And please support us on Patreon. We've had a goal to get to like 1,500 patrons for like a year or two now. And I want to hire more people. I want to have the ability to make this a real thing. I'm shopping to try to get a bigger studio with more room, more testing supplies. We're trying to do it, guys. $2 a month gets you like hour-long videos and the die shrink releases. $4 lets you ask questions on broken silicons and loose ends and get early ad-free access to broken silicon and every now and then other bonus content as well. There's all this stuff there, just $2 or $4 a month, guys. Less than a cup of coffee a month to help fund the channel. Like I'm telling you, that steady income from Patreon is so, I mean, it's so important so that we don't have to rely. I can just tell sponsors if they have a bad deal or an intrusive deal where they like put, the name of our product in the name of your video. And like, even though it has nothing to do with computers, I've seen smaller YouTubers do that. And I'm like, oh God, they actually did it. We don't have to do those dumb ads because of our Patreon. So please support us there. And of course, support our sponsors as well if you want their products. The sponsors I'm working with are very good to us at this point. We're not, I wouldn't be working with them unless they've helped the channel a lot too. But otherwise, nothing else to say. Thank you for watching.
Goodbye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugada as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Full, AV, Anthony Greffa, Greg Pataki, Muhammad Akwari, Brett Jones, Aaron Close, Little Germany, Dan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, Shredbird, Brian Ringelman, Dr. Foreman, Sam Miller, Deke, Josh Law, The Mechanical Philosopher, Joe Foot, SNAS Chalmers, Tom Bailey, Greg T. Wanchik, Andrew S., Frank Zielinski, Daniel D., MJB1, Eric Jackson, Christopher Crossan, Joshua L. Herrera, Valko Malev, The Boss Haas, Nicholas Buckner, Spamtum G. Spamtum, Jonathan, Lord Starstream, General Drips, Blake, Franco Frederic, Matthew Lazier, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Alex Vega, Gregory Acker, Dominique Koch, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Cameron, VentiCZ, Hard4Room.com, Original Ross, Slicky, Lance Bassler, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Christopher A. Butler, GZ Ziggy, Sarcastro, Stephen Hart, David Sebastian, Meat and Pork, Stu, Tim Robb, Luis Carrera, Ian Clifford, Jesse Jaskowiak, Travis Gooding, Holden Mobley, Nanyan, Chris Ritz, Cheapest Learners, Mads, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Chuck Glidden, Sammy Malas, Greg, AWS Dandy, Patrick Groh, Amiable Chief, Brett Summers, Miltons, Stephen Dick, Tommy, John, Bruja, Mark Mitchell, Mac Daffy, AC, James Anderson, Marshall Pierce, Mark Raidmaker, Dave Schultz, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Buma, Joseph A. Madrigal, Matthew Landavazo, Stefan Koadik, Henry Zhang, Johnson N., Keith Moore, The Grid, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Joseph Kelly, Earth Taurus, Hexapuma, Chrysantine, Jerome Ferreira, RB Racer, Keith Moore, Michael Cozy, Ben, DNA Tech, Toka, John O'Shea, Royce Meyer, Charles Russell, Reginald Ari, Slushba, Teak Autumn, Jackson Miller, JSMMH, Neith Zenk, Neen Dean, Richard Yao, Audrey's Rocks, Gaiman Since Reagan, Jeff Sedler, Jordan Simkovic, Loophole 35, Winstar, William Wolpe, James I. Raider, Corey Leonard, Nell Lima, John Shin, Justin Bustle, John Swin, Austin Hagerty, Roger Davies, Shea, Julian Leaked, Corey Chappelle, Evan Dingle, C2, John Iverson, Michael Aaron, The Eternal Dreamers, Jansen Angima, Himsa Gung, Derek Lambing, James Mosher, Kiko Sato, and of course, thank yous to Sahara for the music.